Hey, and welcome everybody to an Agile Manifesto Futurespective. I'm going to just literally give you a 30-second quick intro, and then I'm going to pass you into our first session of the day, which is going to be the Futurespective expert panel discussion with Brian, Ray, Jurgen, Geoff, and Giles. These slides are moving forward, but big happy birthday from everybody. Just for the audience, because we've got some amazing audience out there. We've got events running all of February, so this just shows you per region where those events are. A huge global interest in the Agile20Reflect Festival, and everybody who's here today, that's you guys on the map. So literally this afternoon, I've taken what it was on LinkedIn and I've pushed that out into a whole stack of different countries and a different person. So if you see yourself on this list, you know, feel free to add on the chat and say, hi, I'm on, or I'm listening. We've got a whole stack. We've got 4 pages of attendees here. And obviously some of those names you're probably quite familiar with. And of course, you can see the panel who have all got their webcams on at the moment. So after the next slide, we're going to see some demographics to give you an idea of the type of people who are attending this event today. So there's in number 1 position is Scrum Masters. So hopefully we're pitching to the right type of people. Like I said, this is a snapshot of 120 countries which are attending this session today. So some interesting companies that are doing some great manager level and director and staff level. So with that, I'm going to hand over to the first session of the day, hosted by Giles Lindsay, who's got an amazing expert panel to actually go off and start this festival off with a bang. So if you want to connect to any of them, there's going to be QR codes on each one of the pages. And with that, I'm going to actually now pass on to Giles to intro for the panel discussion.
Fantastic. Look, Jonathan, great intro, and thanks very much, everybody, for obviously coming along to this anniversary event. I mean, we've got to be saying right now, firstly, happy birthday to Agile. And we know it happened, obviously, this weekend, 20 years ago. So this is a fantastic event for everybody to be here enjoying. And it is with great pleasure that we have got an awesome audience here joining us. And we've got a great panel. I think, Jonathan, if you can let Geoff back in, I think he is still just has some access problems to join us and get in with. So if you don't mind just trying to see if you can get him to become a panelist, I will wait a couple of seconds and see whether he can join in. But otherwise, you know, I want to really say thank you very much, firstly, to obviously Jurgen, Ray, and Brian for coming along, joining us today, and being part of what's essentially event part 1, the past and future 20 years reflection. Geoff, good to have you back, sir. Great, awesome. Well, look, thank you very much. I'm going to kickstart with some initial questions to get the sort of the minds and juices going this afternoon, this evening, this morning, wherever our GPS is in the world right now. As we do, can each of you please just give a very quick sort of 30 seconds intro about who you are, why you're here representing, and obviously share that with the audience, especially as it's still growing and getting larger and larger every second. So my first intro question for our past and future 20 years reflection is, how has Agile evolved in the last 20 years since the signing of that original manifesto? And I don't know, Brian, if you want to kick us off because you were there and sort of help launch that conversation. But I think I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, and tell the world who you are.
Okay, I'm Brian Marick. I was sort of accidentally invited to the Agile Manifesto meeting, so I can't claim a huge amount of authority. I was invited to be the token tester. I was a person who is known for a style of testing that was very similar to Agile called context-driven testing. And so Martin Fowler twisted somebody's arm and got me invited. I no longer really do testing, but I noticed that Lisa Crispin is on the call. She's the woman whose picture was with a donkey. she and Janet Gregory are now the people that I consider the go-to people for Agile testing. So the question was, what has changed in the last 20 years? Well, an interesting thing about the attendees at the first Agile conference was that they were overwhelmingly programmers. They were a surprising number of them, including me, had experience with the Smalltalk language. Smalltalk is a particular, very flexible language, and out of Smalltalk, there arose the software patterns movement, and Agile arose out of software patterns. Patterns have sort of died in a useful way, though the idea is still good, but that's how we got to Agile. And I think that the big difference that's happened in the last 20 years is that the programmers have kind of been shuffled out of the picture. Agile has become a management style rather than a sort of grassroots bubble up programming style of development. So what's been lost is the actual fingers on keyboards producing code.
Fantastic. Brian, thanks very much for that. I'm going to hand over next in sequence, Ray. Hi, Ray.
Hi. Well, I'm Ray Arell. I've been in the industry, I think, far too long. I'm a hardware person. I'm a systems engineer. Grew up in semiconductor, and semiconductor manufacturing has been my start of all of this. And getting involved with Agile, at least in the early days, after this, the software people came in and I think did a really good job of kind of taking some of the goodness of what we do as engineers and kind of culminated it together into the manifesto and thinking about it in the way of how can we reconnect with management and how can we reconnect with our customers and do value. When I fell into it, I was doing RTL code for state machine design and other things. And so hardware, which is really funny, if you talk to hardware people, they typically will say, well, those are the software people over here and these are the hardware people over here. But reality is we're all writing software. And so taking those design patterns that Brian was talking about and starting to apply those to a hardware equation actually started to work really well. We started to see quality go up. We started to see productivity go up, reusability go up, all of those things. And so I think in the early days, yeah, that technical revolution that he was talking about was very much there. We could do our work more effectively. I wouldn't say that the programmers got pushed out as much as the tent got bigger. And unfortunately, when the tent got bigger, I think that especially at the conferences and events, the new shiny penny suddenly took center stage, and some of it would be more of the soft skill portions of it and all the rest. And I think that in that first 20 years, as we've went through, as we've seen now going from, like I'm saying, from the hardware side over to finance, over to defense, over to government, there's just been a whole bunch of people trying to adopt the mindset and coming up with new methods. And I think that that's been really a big plus. And I would like the programmers, by the way, to re-have the voice, to kind of bring them back into the fold and not be the stepchildren in the sides over there anymore. That would be great.
Right, fantastic intro. Thank you very much, obviously, for being here as we get into some further conversations. I'm going to hand over to Jurgen next. Jurgen, great to have you here with us as well. Thanks very much. Over to you, intro and sort of give us an understanding.
All right, sure. Well, my name is Jurgen Appelo. I'm calling in from Rotterdam, the Netherlands. And my role has been to focus on the non-programming aspects of Agile. So yes, I have seen that it emerged as something specifically applicable to programming. Actually, I am a software engineer by heart, so I did extreme programming and that stuff in 2000 plus. But I ended up in management positions because my team basically begged our managers to promote me away because I sucked so badly at the programming, and I did a better job as a team leader apparently. But the principles remain the same, and I think we can compliment the people who were there at Snowbird for coming up with the values and the principles that turned out to be pretty universal across disciplines and professions. And they focused, of course, given their backgrounds, on the programming part, and they came up with practices that apply to programming. But hey, feedback cycles is not something that only applies to programming. It applies to design, it applies to management, it applies to marketing whatsoever. So yes, as Ray said, the tent got bigger. Other people said, hey, that also applies to my job. I don't happen to be a programmer, but I would love to help and not block things, because that's another thing. The programmers noticed that they couldn't do everything they wanted because they needed other parts of the company to change as well. They want to do things differently, but they were confronted with annual performance appraisals and traditional marketing pipelines, etc. So they were like, hey, you guys should also do something different so that we can do the way program the way we want. So they basically invited the others into the tent, as far as I'm concerned. And I think that's a good thing. So now we end up with business agility as sort of an umbrella term, I suppose, to encapsulate everything. And I would be sad if the programmer said, well, it's not our tent anymore. I don't want to see them leave. For sure, they should have an important room in an important stage in the tent, but let's cherish that other people wanted to be in as well, because to be honest, when you offer a product or a service to a customer, the programming part is a part of it, but it's not everything. There's a lot before and after and around the programming that is quite crucial in order to offer that great experience to a customer. So let's be a bit holistic about it. And yeah, I think that's it's good that we are where we are now.
Awesome. Jurgen, thank you very much. Lots of points I agree, coming from that software engineering background myself as well. So awesome, thanks. Geoff, over to you. Please give us a little intro and give us your thoughts on the question.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I have no idea why I'm here. I'm the odd one out in a way, because I never have been and almost certainly never will be a programmer. I do have a certificate somewhere that says I can program in Visual Basic, but you don't want me on your team, trust me. So I have no background there. And what's been interesting for me, so in 2001, I was a project manager of a software team, but had no idea what they were doing. And so just kind of had to trust their expertise, really. I couldn't tell them what to do and had no desire to tell them what to do. So it sort of fit quite nicely to my lack of knowledge and expertise. And so I think that's why I grasped onto it. And in a way, so I think the original question was around, how's it changed over 20 years? And so I probably don't have as much attachment to the original manifesto in a way, because I didn't create it. So in a way, it hasn't changed at all, because the manifesto hasn't changed at all. And that is still, to this day, the closest you can get to a definition of what Agile is in many ways. So it kind of hasn't changed, but people talking about the tent expanding and being much more relevant to lots more industries, domains, roles, subjects, I just think is fantastic. I still seeing people using the principles and the values in all sorts of different circumstances. So the diversity has just increased tremendously, I would say, over the last 20 years. And I think what's been interesting when you look back, but perhaps interesting wouldn't be the word I'd use at the moment when you were there, is just the number of sort of, I'll say, healthy conflicts along the way. And we sort of hinted at that already. And software developers feel like they've been pushed out, and that's a perspective. And that sense of baffled, whether it's Scrum and Kanban or whether it's business Agile and software, these tensions have been necessary, and they've shown a great deal of passion, and they've been necessary to see it expand and as Jurgen's saying, to encompass the whole when we're talking about product development, customer value. So at the time, it feels quite painful, whatever tension it is, but at the end of it, you think, oh yeah, we needed that tension to grow.
Fantastic. Look, these are all great points, and hopefully this will help lead into the next part of the conversation. And I'm going to leave it open for whoever then wants to come in and organically pass it on to the next member of our expert panel. So one of the questions that have been bandied around a lot recently on LinkedIn, on social media, Twitter, other things, which myself and the organizing committee have, been wrestling with and hearing and seeing what people wanted to answer and how they wanted to answer this particular question. But it has sort of Agile, whether we want to capital A it, small A it, agility, whatever we want to do, has it had its moment in terms of improving organizations? And if not, what other areas for improvement are there? So who wants to go first?
I'll dive in. The feature's here, but it's it's not distributed equally. If you look at a lot of what's going on in Agile development today, I see teams in India getting empowered now, very similar to where a decade ago, somewhere in the US, somebody was getting empowered by using Agile. Same with South Africa or other countries. It's not all equal. So when we think about Agile and Agile development or Agile management or all of the new things that we've got, for some people, it's new for them still. And it's interesting because I've been working with the Agile Alliance the last couple of years and watching the conference and seeing who the attendees are and those things, and 60% new, first exposure to Agile. And it's like, we're 20 years in and yet we're still getting this group of people who've never known what this is or how to work in this way. So I think that there's still growth that's going on. As far as the last part about shifting, and I've seen so much writing about every year, it's the first of the year, Agile's jumped the shark, Agile is, next, this is going to be something beyond Agile, or we try to go rename it by calling it business agility or something else. But it still all comes down to that we've been struggling for 20 years to live up to the principles that are in the Agile Manifesto. Every team that I come and have exposure to, I ask them, are those principles, read them and ask the question, are they easy or hard to do in your company context? And notoriously, more than half of the 12 or maybe 3 of them are easy for them to do and the rest are still hard. So I still think we have lots of work that needs to be done as well. And I know, Jurgen, I'll point to you because you've been doing a lot in the management space. And I think that's been helping, but I'm gonna turn it over to you and get your impression on it.
Yeah, I recently reflected on that on the socials, where I do quite a bit of communication. I compared it with the word cyber. We have to distinguish the word from the meaning. And I am of an age that I remember that we talked about cyber stuff, like cyberspace and cyber things, and that was pretty cool. Nobody uses the word cyber anymore. Only old people use the word cyber, but it is everywhere. We are in cyberspace right now, basically, and we don't have the word for it anymore. And the young ones have no idea what you're talking about when you use the word cyber. So I think it's the same with Agile. Has the word Agile had its day? Well, as a word, maybe at some point we're not going to use it anymore, but I don't think we're going to see feedback cycles lengthening again for any time soon. In fact, they will keep shortening for a while. I'm pretty sure. But maybe we will stop calling it Agile, and who cares? I don't care personally if we come up with other terms. And I'm also been quite fascinated by other movements such as design thinking and lean startup and whatnot. That had very, very similar insights from very different angles, very different perspectives. Feedback cycles have been around since time immemorial, We should not pretend that we were the ones in the Agile community coming up with the idea that we should deliver things faster. It made total sense to have that insight in the software world, and yes, we pulled other people in. But I'm okay with letting go of the term and just seeing this as it's a cliche, but the new normal that we live in nowadays. So the values and principles remain very much the same, but the practices change over time, because the way we do Agile now, it's very different from how we did that 20 years ago. So yeah, goodbye Agile, welcome new world, basically, that Agile has helped to introduce.
Who else wants to step in?
I guess, having slotted myself in as something of the programmer advocate and troublemaker, I guess I might as well lean into that and embrace it. Around 2002, I joined, or I just went for a few days to visit a well-functioning early Scrum team and talk to the various people there. And they were loving it. And particularly, I remember the product owner said to me that, you know, being a product owner is way, way harder than the way I used to do this stuff, but it's so great, and I can't see why anyone else, I can't see why anyone would want to develop software any other way. So that was 2002. I don't remember the year exactly, but maybe around 2009, 2010, I was one of a vast flood of rent-a-consultants who were brought in to spread Scrum throughout the enterprise. And I was talking to one of the people there, and he said, and this is burned in my brain, at least my job doesn't suck as much as it used to. So you have, in the period of 8 or so short years, going from something that was quite frankly liberatory to something that is, oh, well, I guess it's better. And that was actually the time when I decided I need to switch out of Agile consulting. But I think it's important to, maybe it's important to understand that the original Agile caught on because there were a bunch of people who were suffering to the extent that, you know, well-paid people who sit in an office all day can suffer, but they were working in a situation that they knew was wrong and painful, and they had an idea based on actual experiences of something that would work better. And that's been lost, the sense that this is about, I think that's been lost, the sense that this is about making people happier. Agile caught on because Ward Cunningham had the great idea to put up AgileManifesto.org with principles and values. And the really clever idea was that he had the idea to let people sign the manifesto. And there was a absolute flood of people saying, yes, yes, I want this, I want this, I want this. And I guess to some extent, I think that has gone away, and I think that's too bad.
I would disagree with that. It's gone away. I think other people have the right to be happier as well. Not only the programmers, but also the project managers and the line managers and the HR people and the marketers, etc. Because why would they not have suffered to a similar extent as the programmers? So let's praise them for being among the first to realize that things can be done differently. But not trying to plug my book here, but I wrote the book Managing for Happiness that seems to be doing quite well. So other people try to be happier in their jobs as well. So I don't see it as having gone away. I just see it as the need has been realized, or we have realized the need in other areas as well. So
it's okay that managers are happy.
Well, I think
I don't mind that.
The one group that I think is missing.
Thank you, Brian.
1 second. I think it is notable that Agile has become, to a much greater extent than it used to, a dirty word among software development teams.
That's sad.
Well, I was gonna, not to step over on this, but I've had people tell me that they've been scrummed, using it as a verb, that it's been inflicted upon them. And every time I've dug into those situations, I discovered that they weren't practicing the mindset. They weren't practicing Agile. They were actually just using a waterfall mindset or a fixed mindset, and not, they're just not doing it right. And if it hurts, as they say, if it hurts, you're doing it wrong. And that's been a case for certain things. And I didn't mean to step over you, Geoff.
I'm sure Geoff has an opinion on that. Come on, Geoff.
Well, I think the one group that hasn't really been mentioned so far is customers have a right to be happy as well. And I was chatting to Mike Cohn last week, and he said if he'd have been in the Agile Manifesto creation room, it would have been worse. The manifesto would have been worse for his involvement, because he would have lobbied against the duplication of the word customer. But actually, he's glad that it was duplicated, because customers are really important in this, and that's our primary motivation. The idea of if it hurts, you're doing it wrong, I do disagree with that one, because actually change does hurt. Doing something differently does hurt. Changing your habits is really uncomfortable for people, and actually we need to get past that discomfort. So yeah, I get there's a difference between discomfort and hurt, but equally I think for a lot of the people that I'm working with, developers, customers, everyone has to sort of put themselves out there and risk feeling uncomfortable while they get used to a different way of working, and it's really scary. And yeah, that I think, from trying to come back to the idea that software developers kind of feel that Agile is a dirty word, I can get that. I absolutely can. And it is a shame, like Jurgen says. And anyone that's had Agile done to them hasn't experienced Agile. I think that's something we could probably all agree on, right? And does that make Agile a dirty thing? I don't think so. So is Agile going away? In a way, I hope it does. So the kind of things that we talked about, it should just not be a thing anymore. It's just kind of the way that we do things in certain circumstances. That's normal. And I think we're finding that, Jurgen saying perhaps we're feeling old now, and I am starting to feel old. People start to say, well, where did this come from? Why would you not have done this? But they haven't experienced the situation that we were in 20 years ago, when it was very difficult to have cycle times like that and feedback loops like that. So I'll stop waffling there and let somebody else come in.
But I wanted to just say on that one, Geoff, when you say about the customer and the customer focus, and I see that what the intent was, we were going to originally connect engineers closer to the customer. And what I found was, because I used to work for a very big, Fortune 100 company. And the hardest thing that we ever had is don't let the engineers in the room with the customers, because they're going to make, and this literally, I heard this from the marketing people and the sales people, is they're going to go promise something and they're not going to deliver it. And this lack of trust that kept those pools away in the bigger companies. And I don't think we got there yet with Agile to be able to have a real legitimate conversation between the customer and the developers and connecting those two. Some companies have done really good jobs. I'm really impressed with like Microsoft, where if you go post a question about a Microsoft thing, that it's a developer who's answering you. and that to me is like to the metal, to where you need to do. And what we've seen is with companies, when they do that, they're actually more successful. They suddenly turn stuff around.
Dictate, right? Yeah,
What's that?
And I think market forces, they take time, right? But the companies that are successful by employing those tactics will eventually win out. I think one of the things that I've suffered with over my 20 years is over empathy in a way. And so when you paint that picture of not being able to trust developers to be in the same room with the customer, I can picture a scenario where I can empathize with the person saying that, because the developers haven't got the tools, the experience, the confidence to actually have those conversations safely and not feel that they're going to be overruled or what have you. And it takes time to get us all to that point.
Right.
And we've made such progress in that. Not everywhere, admittedly, but we've made such progress in that. And I think that should be applauded by everyone who's taken that step forward.
Yeah, glass is half full, not half empty, as far as I'm concerned. Two things came to mind. You said that people have been scrummed and Agile has been done to them. Well, for me, that's just proof that the non-programmers need to learn what is expected from them as well in order to have the organization be successful. So it cannot be a programmer-only thing, because then the rest of the organization is going to keep behaving badly in an un-agile way. And second, I like the idea of, well, sometimes changes got to start with hurting. I often share the story of me a few years ago when I started running. I did it really, really badly, and everything hurt. I discovered muscles I didn't even know existed in my body. But it was motivation for me to learn, okay, how do I do this thing better? Because this is not working for me. But I had to go through that pain in order to be motivated to learn how to do this better, breathing techniques and posture and all that stuff. So yeah, sure, but some people just run in and say, oh, we're doing stand-up meetings, we're scrumming, yay, and then nothing works. And then they figure out, okay, this is painful, maybe we should go to a conference or get a decent coach or something. That's good. You made the first couple of steps, you're on the way. Let's praise them.
Well, I'm going to step in because there's been some fantastic points raised by everybody. And I do think for those of us, all of us here have certainly been on that journey for the 20 years that we are celebrating here tonight. I think one of the things we've got to be mindful of, as it says happy birthday up here on screen right now, we've got to be mindful of, we ran an event last night, a small event last night, and we actually discovered that a lot of the community, the cohort that came along to actually listen, were discovering Agile that day. You know, this was something that they wanted to find out about. You know, we can't presume that necessarily absolutely everybody here has been on a 20-year journey or a 15-year journey or a 10-year journey with this, and somehow they've been through the peaks and the troughs as well, and discovered successes in organizations and failures, resistance from the leadership or the middle management, or even from the teams themselves. So, you know, in trying to, you know, inspire those people that are coming onto that journey now themselves, possibly the growth mindset, which is actually underpinning what we want to do with success in our organizations. You know, what does the future hold for this word Agile, this way of working, this mindset, this set of philosophy and values? What does this hold, and possibly even, you know, for the next 20 years? Where do you think we would likely be in the next 20 years? Do you think it's evolved simply beyond the conversation we're having now, that it just becomes a de facto part of the way of working, the norm? We've removed bureaucracy, command and control, micromanagement, and time in terms of that sort of organizational structure? Or do you think it's actually going to commercialize even further? You know, I recently had the chance of chatting with Dave Snowden at a previous conference, who said, that's it, no, it's dead, you know, move on, you know, and we all love Dave for the great points he raises. But I just wonder, how do we inspire that next generation? What do we think possibly the next period, 5, 10, even 20 years is going to look like? And I'm going to pass that back to the panel.
Geoff, go ahead.
I'd say maybe we're looking at it slightly wrong there, and just take the chance to say, well, how can the next generation inspire us? Because we're kind of assuming that that just because we've gone through that journey so far, we know what the next step is. But actually, we've got our own biases, and we're probably still blinkered by them. But people coming in with a fresh mindset, okay, they might be tempted to make the same mistakes, and we can warn them of history. But equally, I'd be encouraged to say, look at this blank slate. Where would you go next? Thanks, Ray.
I think I like that happiness of customers was mentioned, because I think we can use that as our North Star to see where we're going. If we keep that in mind, we made one step by replacing project with product. That was good, but it's a first. We need to replace product with experience. To give you examples, I have been livid with some companies that offered me great products, but it was sheer impossible just to get the invoice for the thing that I paid for. Or I was quite satisfied with the product, but customer service sucked, bottomless pit of disaster, basically. The other way around can also be the case. There are some products that are so-so, but I stick to them because I love the company, I love the service, I love everything about it, and I will forgive them for not having the best programmers in the world, because the holistic experience for me is still really a really good one. So I think we need to be responsible for the entire experience that customers have. We do not offer just bits and atoms. We create happiness molecules in their brains. That's what we're responsible for, and that includes the entire organization. So I think we have quite a way to go, and that's, as I said, I love design thinking and other methods and frameworks and movements that have something to say in that area.
Nice.
Yeah, to add to that, well, the one thing is someone new again and being involved. The freshness of some novelty that put in front of you, and you go, oh, that's exactly the way that we should be approaching this. Those feelings, you're right. For most of us who've been in Agile for about 20 years, we don't have that, let's go look through the eyes of a newbie in that particular perspective. But what I think is that there's new stuff that's coming out all the time, and we're too focused on the recipes rather than the craft. And specifically, what I want to see happen, at least for the new people getting involved, that yes, there are those frameworks and there's those pieces and they're great training wheels, but you need to grow past those and become a chef. And not everyone needs to be chefs, but become a way of being able to look at the pieces that you have in front of you and be able to build something new and share that. Because one of the things that I thought on the manifesto was done really well, that we found a way, and that's what they open it up with, that I found a way, and we want to help others to do it. And I thought that was the thing that when Ward published the manifesto out, not just the signature portion of it is, but people like you, Brian, and others went off and started helping people to go do that. And this community has this whole festival is about giving back and helping, because we've been through the trenches. So I think getting back to where we're going in the next realm of all of this is not the commercialization of Agile. Agile isn't the destination. Building a better product is the destination. It's this community of practice getting together and being where I can share an idea at a conference or on a phone call, or just being able to share things out. And then that idea, that the infection of the idea, because ideas are infectious, they jump from brain to brain, that infection, it just literally gets other people to come up with new ideas and then share those ideas with us. And then I think that was what Geoff was saying was, I really want to hear about new ideas. I'm tired of hearing about Scrum personally. I know for people it's new for them, that's good, but I want to hear about the new stuff. I want to hear about the cool things somebody did with the pattern, Anyway.
Who's next? Brian, over to you.
I predict that sometime within the next 20 years I will die. Other than that, I have no predictions for the future, because my predictions for the future have not actually been very accurate in the past, and I see no reason to think they're going to get any better now. I want to do some of the what would you add to the manifesto, because I have a whole talk on that.
Good stuff. Okay, well, so a slight follow on from what we were just talking about, and I love Geoff's point about how do we get those people starting their journey to inspire us. But I'm going to ask, you know, if you could give one sort of piece of advice to someone who is here today, this evening, this afternoon, this morning, wherever we are in the world, and we're a very small world here today, you know, what advice would that be to help them start that journey? What advice, what organic piece of information would you sort of share with them? And I get that from Jeff's point, we would want to get something in return as well from them, but what would you guys give them to help them start their journey? And again, anyone who's got a point, please step in.
So my thing would be this, and please read the manifesto, because most people who start their journey skip by that really quick, and really do the assessment when you're looking at the principles. Ask yourself the question again, like I said earlier, what is easy and hard to do? And if you take just create a list and then say that this is the hardest thing to go change in my universe and my world, and it's going to take months and big projects to go off and go do, don't work on that thing first, because we tend to go work on the biggest, ugliest things as engineers first, versus go to the bottom of the list of the easiest thing that you can change today to make your life a little bit better. And my take is work on that one first, change that thing, have a party, celebrate that you got that done, and then roll on to the next easier thing to go fix based on that. That would be my advice.
Nice advice. Right, thank you very much. Geoff, hand up.
I saw some of the questions coming up on my screen. So one of them stuck in my head, and it's one that I don't have an answer to, but it's one I'm going to link here, which was, how well do we think universities are teaching Agile? And I don't know about anybody else, but I don't know the answer to that, right? But I would like to, I think it's relevant to the question that you've asked, Giles, for me, in that I think if universities are doing their job well, they're teaching people to be curious. They're teaching people to respect the past, but create the future with curiosity. And I think that's what I would be encouraging people to do, whether they're at university or not, is learn other people's lessons, because you can avoid some serious pain that way, but that doesn't mean that what they did is going to be right for you. And so having that healthy respect for the past, but a healthy bravery for creating something new would be my #1 message for anybody.
Brilliant. Fantastic, Geoff. Thanks very much. Guys, we got obviously Jurgen and Brian.
Two things. Since most everybody is doing some sort of Scrum, Ken Schwaber wrote an obscure, but what I think, or at least thought at the time, it's been a long time, was a really good book about Scrum, and it was basically stories about how people in particular Scrum teams acted in exemplary ways. Like, for example, I have often used the story of the Scrum Master and the Furniture Police as an example of what a Scrum Master would be. So I won't tell the story of the Scrum Master and the Furniture Police so that somebody will have to buy the book to get it. I wish I could remember the name of the book. I will bounce off and find it and put it in some place where people can see it. The second thing is, one of the nice things in Kent Beck's first edition of his book on extreme programming was he had a little graph that showed how the 10 or 12 or whatever core practices of extreme programming hooked up together and supported each other. And I liked that because it made a big, there was a big emphasis on how some of these practices are difficult and that you need more self-discipline to do Agile than you need for conventional software development, and that you have to invent ways, tools, practices, habits that force self-discipline on you when you would ordinarily be weak. So the idea that, I guess, self-discipline is the first thing, and think about what it is about your working environment that encourages you to be disciplined versus not.
Fantastic. Brian, great point.
Yeah.
Jurgen.
I would like to summarize it with Ash Maurya's quote, "Love the problem, not the solution." I have seen for the last 20 years far too much focus on solutions, on people building stuff without having full understanding of what problem they are actually solving. The first thing I would tell people, forget all the Agile practices, go and check out jobs to be done theory. What is the actual job that the customer is trying to do? They ask you for a drill, the famous example, but they don't want a drill. They don't want a hole in the wall. They want to put a picture on the wall. That's what they like. They want to decorate their room. That's the job that you're helping them out with. Now, a hole in the wall is one possible solution in order to get there, but there are other avenues of getting there. The customer asks you for a bridge, but that's a solution. What they actually want is they want to get on the other side of the river because they're traveling. So there's far too little understanding still, in my opinion, in the Agile community. What is the job? There's a lot of focus on creating a backlog and lots of user stories, and the customer wants this and the customer wants that. All right, maybe do not listen to the customer for a while. I have been in a situation that I listened to customers far too much and just did whatever they asked, but the customer had no clue because the customer thinks in terms of solutions. The customer finds it very hard to think in terms of what problem do they actually have. And that should be more of our focus. What problem are we trying to solve for them? Because the customer often has difficulty even describing it or realizing it. We need to observe, we need to investigate and analyze. And then when we see the real problem, we could have very different solutions that are simpler, more effective, and more successful. When the customer says, "Oh my God, you really nailed it. That's not what I asked, but that's it." We are a long way from there, in my opinion.
Okay, well, we have got now a load of questions. As we can see, there's 59 questions that have come in from our community already this evening. And of course, we are coming back to a proper full-on open mic Q&A session at the end of the evening, afternoon, morning, once we've had Laura come and share her amazing talk. And so all of us will be back again. But if there's a question here that you see on screen that you would like to answer, we would like to just get one at a time, choose a question, answer it, and hopefully then the team behind the scenes will refresh so another one can come up and the next person can choose one question, answer it, and we'll move on round in a sort of pattern like that. So are there any questions there that any of the expert panel would like to provide an answer for?
Brian really wants to talk about changes to the Agile Manifesto, so I want to hear that as well.
Yeah, go Brian, go.
I'm opening up the presentation that I made called Agile 10 Years Later, but it keeps stealing, the GoToMeeting keeps stealing my screen. And I don't know if I can remember all of them. Well, I don't know that this is going to work. I'll try to remember. There were, I think, 5 new ones I added. Discipline might have been one of them. I know that one of them was ease, working with ease. I even made posters for that I used to give out to clients. that said work with ease, or yeah, work with ease. My wife does surgery, or she used to before she retired. She used to occasionally do surgery, and she would describe working with a really good surgical team where she is just talking through what she's thinking of, and she makes this gesture that she'll just reach out her hand and the proper instrument will appear as if by magic in her hand, and then the same movement she plunges it into the abdomen of a cow, because she did surgery on cows. And one of the things I noticed about successful Agile teams was that feeling of ease. And I think it's an important, I don't know, practice is find the things that are rough and feel like friction in the process of doing the work and getting rid of those. That just seemed to be a practice of good teams. I had joy in there for Jurgen, but he's already covered that. One of the other ones that I thought was interesting was that good Agile teams seem to be reactive rather than proactive. Instead of planning to get something done and performing it, they work on their skill at reacting to surprise, and being able to gracefully change their course, whether that course is what the product should do or how the code should be created, and so forth. And though there were others, but those are the two I can remember. And I really like the work with ease one, because that seems to be one of those things that people don't think is important, but is actually very important. If I remember any others, I'll chime in.
Brian, thank you very much. Obviously, Geoff, Ray, Jurgen, are there any other questions that you've either seen flashing up on screen or are up here now that you would like to drop into and just provide a short answer? We've got about 7-8 minutes left before we hand over to our second event of the evening. Afternoon, morning.
Well, I just wanted to briefly respond or add on to Brian with his reactive mode. One thing that has bugged me for 20 years was this responding to change in the Agile Manifesto. Why not causing the change? Because if you're always responding to change, you're never the leader in an industry. Elon Musk is now the richest man in the world, and he did not respond to change. He caused the change that others had to respond to. That's innovation. So I think we have to move from Agile to innovation at certain times, be disruptive and cause the change that others will have to scramble to adapt to. So that's what I would love to change about the manifesto.
By definition there, Jurgen, there can only be a small proportion of people who are causing the change if everyone else is scrambling after it.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's something that and I think that's the beauty for me of this, is that you can apply this to innovation and you can apply this to maintenance. You can apply these principles to different ways of working in whatever circumstances you find yourselves in. The question that I would have picked out, although I can't see it anymore, was something to do with how do you stop zombie scrum or bastardizing Agile? And I wouldn't really put my energy into that personally. I think even zombie scrum has its place. It's all part of learning. It's all part of the organizations that do it well do it better. The organizations that don't either fail because they don't do it well, or they learn very quickly to do it better. So I wouldn't suggest, I try and over-empathize, like I said, and say, well, everyone is trying to do their best right now. No one's trying to be a failure. No one's trying to do things badly. And so appreciate the efforts they're making, give them the benefit of the doubt, and be there to catch them and help them get up and go again. So don't try and stop it, because that implies a judgment to me.
Right.
Brilliant.
And to add to what you all have said, I agree with all of it. Is that there's a couple of ideas that are in the manifesto that are not really explored. One is we put that term of we want to have sustainability in development. And sustainability it can be a big word. It's, you could pack a lot into that, but I'd like to explore, and as we go forward, of what does that mean? Is it just, Scrum isn't here, or any of the Agile methods are not here to torture anybody. It should be a sustainable pace of development that we can go create. But to Jurgen's point as well, is just that if you look at the learning fast and the empathy equation of learning fast, sometimes what we learn we don't like, but we learn it. And the question of how we pivot and how we move on from an idea to a new idea, and let that organic, and back to Dave Snowden and what he talks about in the Cynefin model, which is, when we're dealing with great degrees of complexities, and guess what, humans are complex creatures. We need more empathy to be added into this. And then we just need to learn and pivot and do things in a way that people just don't get all wrapped around the axle about delivery dates and deadlines and all of these other things that I hear, that when you actually push on somebody and say, why is that delivery date there? And they can't answer it for you other than it's just a date somebody made up. That, let's be a little bit more, we know the story's going to unfold. If we put energy towards it, it's going to unfold. Let's put the empathy into the equation, and let's use that in a way that we could move forward more effectively together than just we have been, I think.
Right. I mean, fantastic point for us to, I think, start our wrap up of our panel discussion. Thank you to everybody who's obviously adding the questions. As mentioned, our sort of fourth and final part of today's event is the big panel Q&A discussion at the end. So please do keep the questions coming, because we will try and get through as many as possible, and also get our guests to help choose the questions that they think they want to answer and share with you guys as the community. So back to Brian's piece with the stories. Funny, we actually, the committee team here today, we're thinking about getting the community and speakers and guests and other Agilistas around the world to help create an ebook, if you like, of stories of the things where it has worked well, where it hasn't worked well in organizations, to share those real world learnings. We've already sort of started the organizing and everything else, and it would be great, obviously, if we can follow up with you all, and obviously our future speakers as well, to take part in that, to add your sort of view of this snapshot at the 20-year mark, and what we've been through, the successes, the failures, the highs, the lows, and everything else. Again, I think it as a great reflection to help inspire that next generation who are coming on behind us. Brian, I hope in 20 years you're not dead. It would be nice if that wasn't the case.
I'd rather be dead than old.
Well, look, guys, I personally want to say thank you very much for an absolutely incredible panel discussion. I know some of you guys are coming up next as well in terms of the TEDx Lightning talks. And hopefully, as we've seen, we've been sharing some of the demographics where all of our amazing audience are coming along to from the world today. And I'm sure Jonathan will be able to give us an update when he comes on in a minute, knowing where all of the people, the community, are turning up and watching us from today. So, gents, thank you very much. Major appreciation, major shout out to obviously Ray, Brian, Geoff and Jurgen. Thanks, guys. And obviously we'll see you later at the panel discussion. All right, so now, without further ado, it's great that we are about to enter into our second part today. I'm going to invite my good friend and colleague and partner, Jonathan, to come back on. And obviously, Mark, great to see you, my friend. Mark is obviously up for his first talk. Jonathan, are you there? Are you rejoining us? I hope so. I hope he is.
Yeah, I'm just going to put myself back onto camera in a second. So fantastic session, some amazing content there, and I like what you kind of pointed out with how we can continue the conversation afterwards, and we're going to do this free ebook forever, which anyone can collaborate to, and you know, it'll be for, you know, people will be able to share where they were on the 20th anniversary as far as the stories they were telling, those experience reports, which are really important. So with this session, I'm going to have to, it's going to be fast and furious. The idea behind it is inspirational talks. So we've got inspirational talks from 4 of our panelists today, starting off with Mark. Mark's going to be talking to us about accelerating value delivery with Discipline Agile Toolkit. So he's going to be the first one up. And then we're going to get Jurgen to come back with mindful sense making. Then Geoff with the scaling Agile has never worked and never will. And then Brian finally will finish it off in the sessions, which is only going to be an hour in total, so 12 minutes each. Agile is a kind of post secrecy work. So, you know, part of it is it's as you can see in the background with my TED talk, you know, part of it is it's inspiring people. It's kind of putting out the message of how important this is. So with that, I'm going to start Mark off. I'm going to make him presenter, so he's going to be able to share his screen. And then logistically, if Mark, you have any problems, just let me know, and I will, you know, I'm making you presenter now.
Okay, sounds good. Can you see my screen?
I can indeed. So I'm going to leave you with it. Good luck. Your 12 minutes starts now.
All right, now I can see me. I can't see my screen. I can't see my PowerPoint.
I can't see your PowerPoint now, but it seems to have minimized. I don't know if it's on the screen.
Can you see it now?
I can see it now. It's perfect.
All right, good. Half a minute's gone. It's really hard to get through Disciplined Agile in 12 minutes, but I'll give it a shot. I'm Vice President and co-creator of Disciplined Agile with Scott Ambler. We were acquired by the Project Management Institute in 2019, and we're absolutely thrilled to be part of this large not-for-profit organization, PMI. So if you think you know PMI, I think you probably don't. It's not your father's PMI. It's known as the Project Management Institute, a stodgy old company teaching people how to run projects in a waterfall fashion. That is not the new PMI. We've completely reinvented ourselves. In fact, that is a primary reason behind acquiring us, so that PMI could really have a say in the Agile space. You know, some people have, and I thought the conversation in the panel was interesting about potentially the word Agile going away. What happens then to the Agile Alliance? What happens to Discipline Agile if the word disappears? And how about the Project Management Institute? In this world where we're moving from projects to products, some people have said to me, Mark, you should rename the organization the Product Management Institute. Well, it's not going to happen for a number of reasons, but one of which is PMI absolutely has a large portion of their membership that are passionate about Agile, but a larger portion actually is concerned with traditional project management, and projects aren't going away. Yeah, people have nothing to do with IT. They build bridges, they build skyscrapers in Dubai, they build pipelines. They have a beginning, they have an end, they're clearly projects. So it's good to have both, and that's what PMI has both. So we talk about making people's careers more enriching, helping them to grow, providing better compensation and opportunities for them. That's what PMI is about. And now that we have Discipline Agile, we have that solution there. So I wanted to blend in some context since we're celebrating the 20 years. And this is an executive, and he's going, like, are we there yet? Are we done? Are we Agile? You know, I spent millions of pounds or dollars on frameworks and trainings and consultancies. I'm not really sure I'm seeing any benefit. Are we there yet? And there's some metrics behind this now, some data. Don Reifer surveyed 1,500 Agile teams, and the results aren't very good. I mean, an Agile method, 7 to 12% more productive. An Agile scaling framework, 3 to 5% more productive. Clearly, that's underwhelming. So we're not really meeting the promise that we had out there. So why are we still struggling? Why are we still debating about my method versus your method, what works and what doesn't? I think part of the reason is we're looking for simple solutions. You may have seen this quote: for every complex problem, there is an answer that's clear, it's simple, and it's wrong, right? So people are trying to find the easy answer. They want to buy a framework. They sometimes declare themselves as a certain kind of shop, like a safe shop or a Scrum shop or an XP shop. You can't buy agility. So being disciplined means lots of things, but I'm going to focus on investing to learn our options, optimizing your overall system for our situation, our context, and accelerating delivery value to our customers. So let's talk about learn for a second. We want to supercharge our skills. We really desperately need to do this. It's kind of embarrassing, actually, how much we invest on the Agile side of things in our personal development. I'll talk a bit more about that. But I do feel I need to address the Agile Manifesto. And I'm not suggesting we leave the Agile Manifesto behind. Just like we love it that we went from horses to the Ford Model T, I think we can agree that we can move on. I wouldn't want to drive one now. Same thing with the Agile Manifesto. It was written by, as Brian said, written by software developers for software developers. Right, the very first line, we are uncovering better ways of developing software. And as Jurgen said, it's way more than software. Stuff before, stuff after, stuff around it. And also, one of the principles, deliver software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months. I mean, come on, that's setting a pretty low bar. That used to be a big deal, an accomplishment. But now when you've got the Amazons of the world delivering many, many times a day, this clearly doesn't cut it anymore. So I think it's fair to move on, not to move on, but to make it better. Like if we can amend the Constitution, why can't we amend the manifesto? But and in fact, we did in Discipline Agile. We came up with the Discipline Agile Manifesto to add some of the things that Brian talked about and more. But we got some kickback from it, people calling us heretics because we're messing with the manifesto. And by the way, manifesto sounds kind of, I don't know, controversial. So what we've done is we framed these ideas and sort of updated some new ideas to make it just more embracing beyond software. Think about solution delivery. And I won't read all these, but in the principles, so principles, promises, and guidelines. In principles, we talk about how context matters and choice is good, agnosticism, pragmatism, and of course, delighting our customers. And being awesome, which is related to joy. In the promises section, some of my favorites are creating psychological safety and embracing diversity. Like we didn't have diversity when we built the Agile Manifesto. I think if we were to do it again, I would hope we would bring a more diverse set of backgrounds and individuals to that endeavor. Improving predictability, minimizing WIP, and all those kinds of things. In the guidelines, a couple of my favorites: create effective environments that foster joy. And I think it might have been Brian who mentioned joy. Yeah, Richard Sheridan wrote a great book, Joy Inc., and we incorporate some of his ideas into DA. And a shout out to Jurgen, change the culture by improving the system. The great stuff from Jurgen's Management 3.0 and his other works. The new role of leadership, that rather than managers, don't try to change the people. You got great people, but they're usually stuck in a bad system. Focus on improving the system. So these are sort of the way we think about a modernized version of the manifesto. So let's get into the learning aspect that I talked about. You and your teams have lots of options, lots of them, but do you know what they are? And do you know which ones work in different situations? We're under-investing in learning nowadays. Like I'm an old guy, I learned the UML, I taught it. I taught requirements management and iterative project management and object-oriented analysis and design. Seems like we don't learn that stuff anymore. We take shortcuts, and to be honest with you, I think we're being a bit lazy. So, if you look at the certification programs that are out there, they don't cover a lot of, I think, fundamental things like release planning, risk management, modern governance. I'm not talking about stage gate, I'm talking about agile or lean governance. The selection of methods or life cycles. We go to a Scrum certification or a SAFe certification or a Kanban or whatever it is. We have to have a dozen certifications on our LinkedIn profiles. Why can't we go somewhere and learn the variety of them in an agnostic, pragmatic way so I can pick the one that makes sense for me in my situation? So lots of stuff on the left isn't covered. And we don't have time to talk about DA, but I just want to show you just that there's a lot of material there. Like we talked about 53 different types of modeling. We're taught about stories and epics, but we're often not taught about personas, maybe some interesting UML ideas. other visual or textual modeling techniques. We would never want to use them all, but it's nice to know what they are so that we can cherry pick them, the ones that make sense for us. So this, I think of them like in the previous slide, the marketplace, right, of ingredients. And if you don't know what saffron is, then you're missing out. You're making some really good recipes. And that's what we need to do, is become better chefs. So, and people say, oh, Mark, it's too confusing. There's too much stuff out there. It's actually not. If you're doing Scrum, you're doing DA. It's a subset of it, because Scrum is composed of practices, and all those practices are in disciplined Agile. So Scrum is a recipe composed of ingredients, but there aren't very many ingredients in Scrum. It's described by a 13-page body of knowledge, the Scrum guide, and that's fine, because Ken and Geoff want us to go figure out architecture and testing and UX and all those kinds of things. That's the beauty of Scrum. But a lot of people don't know what their options are. So we have Scrum-based life cycles, Lean-based life cycles, exploratory, which is based on Lean Startup, continuous delivery flavors, and program for scaling situations. And just to give you an idea of how the content is organized, we have these things called goal diagrams, which are the selection of different strategies, practices, and so that you can easily find them if you're thinking about usage, fleshing out the usage of your solution. You might use epics or user stories. Story maps is another good technique, or you may use personas. And what we see in the body of knowledge is you have a definition of each of these, references out to where you can find more information, like one of Jurgen's books as an example, I'm sure we reference. And on the right-hand side, context, where this particular technique might help you. Like personas can help us build user experiences, build empathy with our users as an example. So it's a great learning tool, is what I'm saying. So move on to optimize. So imagine you invest in learning all these different strategies, so now you can cherry pick. How do you use it? Well, choice is good, right? And context counts. Ask yourself in your organization, are you following or are you leading? Are you a sheep or are you a wolf? And so just trying to bring up my phone here to see how much time I have left. Now, so you want to be a wolf. Look at the companies that you fear, and what are they doing? Are they copying and pasting Spotify, or are they becoming a Spotify? Are they learning ways of working that make sense for them? And if you look at the companies on the right, which of those companies do you think are using something like SAFe, copying and pasting and following prescriptive advice, or which ones do you think are saying, let's do what makes sense for us, and how can we choose our way of working? And that's what we're suggesting. If you follow a framework, you're quickly going to run out of advice from that framework, and then where do you go? How do you improve? Well, you can use Kaizen, continuous improvement, retrospectives, and process experiments, many of which will fail. That's failing fast, and that's great. The quicker we fail, the quicker we learn, the quicker we improve, but that's an expensive and time-consuming process. You are unique, but you know what? A lot of what you've done has been done elsewhere. What if you looked at the body of knowledge to say, oh, this has been proven to help in this kind of situation, maybe I'll try that. That accelerates your learning and your process improvement. We call this guided continuous improvement. And the great news here is that you do not need to start from scratch. You start where you are. It's in place improvement. So start where you are, do the best that you can, always strive to get better. So I'm not saying stop doing Scrum, stop doing Kanban, stop doing SAFe, but I guarantee you that there are ideas in the toolkit you've never even heard of that will make you more effective. So I do not want you to become a disciplined Agile shop. That's ridiculous. You're not a shop. You do many different kinds of things. SAFe might be one thing, but I guarantee you there's lots of teams that are not doing SAFe. They're being quite effective. So lastly, accelerate. We want to deliver more value to delight customers. And DA goes far beyond delivery. That's where this DA started, as disciplined Agile delivery, high performance teams. But to be effective, the entire organization, the functional areas need to be Agile as well, or you will not have long-term sustainable agility. So how do you make those other areas Agile? Well, what we teach, we've been doing this, by the way. We don't just write books. I've been doing Agile since it was before it was called Agile. And we know that we have to help these other areas. So think about your IT delivery or value stream delivery. Is it flowing value to your customers, or are you getting your pipes clogged up? So quick examples as I wrap up here is that, I ask you to think if you've heard of these kinds of conversations. Your delivery team, finance says your funding runs out next month. I need you to create a business case, a project plan with estimates, and have it reviewed by the PMO before I can extend your funding for 3 months. And the team lead throws up their hands, but that means my teams will have to stop for several weeks to do this planning. They will be producing no value during this time. So question, is finance an impediment or an enabler to your agility? Obvious answer. HR, I urgently need another developer. HR, you will need a funding approved by finance, a requisition filled out, and internally posted the position for 2 weeks before we can start interviews. Okay, I'll skip release management, same idea. You got features every day, but your release management only deploys once a month or once a quarter. A couple more examples is data. You know, data says, no, I need a month turnaround before I'll approve that schema change. Finance, team lead says, can we stop doing timesheets? It's garbage. You know, nobody puts the right data in. Finance says it's important that we understand all tasks worked on and time spent so that we can properly create accounting entries for CapEx, OpEx. Have you heard that? I can tell you, you do not need to do timesheets. I think of one of the largest pizza companies in the world that has abolished timesheets because we train them on a better way to get the information without timesheets. Therefore, saving people time and just a little bit more agile. And by the way, a little bit more joy because nobody likes timesheets. And a typical Scrum Master is taught to lead and help a team. They're not taught how to negotiate change with other areas so that they can choose their own ways of working and become agile themselves. So we need to take our coaching and our Scrum Masters up a notch. So to summarize, learn, better skilled teams deliver better results, quicker, happier, lower risk. You want to supercharge your skills of your teams. You want to optimize using these new tools, evolve beyond frameworks and methods. Ivar Jakobsen likes to say, we need to escape methods prison. Design your way of working to win, to be competitive, and then accelerate. Now that you've optimized your system or continue to optimize your system, DA can improve value streams and flow of value to the customers. You want to be nimble, improve flow, deliver more value to your customer. Okay, so there's the whirlwind example. And to summarize, the last 20 years versus the next 20 years, I do think we have to get beyond the names of frameworks and the certifications. And now, having said that, obviously we've got certifications for this, but I like to think that ours is a bit more robust and disciplined and credible. We need to teach our teams and enable them to choose the ways of working that make sense for them rather than be constrained by advice by some of these biased or myopic certifications and methods. All right, so that's it. Hopefully you found that useful.
That was absolutely amazing, Mark, and you did you kept to time. You did a whirlwind session, and it was absolutely fantastic. I loved it, and so thank you so much. And I can't wait for the questions to come in and you join us back for the panel discussion later on.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Mark, so much for that. I'm now going to move over to our next speaker, who Mark nicely introduced previously, which is Jurgen, who's going to be talking to us today about mindful sense making. So I'll see you in a bit, Mark. Okay, the keys to the kingdom are over to you, Jurgen. Do you want to share your screen and I'll just check everything technically is working? It is. Your 12 minutes starts now.
Okay. All right, you are seeing my screen. Mindful sense making. Okay, cool. Yeah, so the big pile of rubble that you see here is or was the house of my best friend in California. So imagine the situation. This was August last year. There was a light in the distance on the hills, and they were confused. What's going on there? There's fires in California, obviously. So confusion, state of confusion. Then an hour later, there was a helicopter flying above their heads, basically saying you have 30 minutes or 1 hour to get out of here because the fire is coming your way. That's obviously a crisis, right? Well, then you have no time for dot voting. What are the most important issues, objects to get in your car? So someone has to intervene and take charge. And now they are in a situation of rebuilding their house and dealing with insurance, which is a very complicated thing. So yet another way of dealing with the situation. and they are wondering what to do at all with living in California. Maybe we should just move elsewhere, and that's a complex discussion to have. So in a nutshell, with just one event, I have covered a couple of different domains, as some people would say, different aspects of sense making. And sense making is a collaborative process of creating shared awareness and understanding out of individuals' perspectives and varied interests. I like that definition. It is trying to make sense of the world using different angles, basically, trying to sometimes take a different stance toward a problem and see, how does it work out when I look at it from this place? Now, I'm sure out of the, let's see, 350 people who are watching now, thank you so much for joining us from all over the world. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this sense-making framework by Dave Snowden. Awesome stuff that Dave has been working on for the last 15, 20 years or even more with his Cynefin model. I very much appreciate if you use Dave's work. Of course, what I'm going to show you is inspired by him, but I have my own opinion, as I usually do, on terminology and visualization. So I offer you a different model, and I think that's good. I think it's good to have different perspectives. That is sense making itself. You have a choice of models, of frameworks out there, and I offer this one, and I'm going to lead you through it, and you decide whether you like this one or the other one, or there are other ways of doing sense making, but I leave it up to you. So we start with confusion. Some people would call that disorder. I don't like that word. I think the proper word would be confusion. You have no idea what is going on, such as, there's light over there behind the hills. Is that fire or not? That would be confusion. What do you do in a situation like that? You need more information. Just inquire, investigate, or whatever. You have conflicting signals. There's a fuzzy situation. You basically need to keep inquiring, keep interacting until meaning has formed when you are in the confusion state. Well, pretty quickly for our friends, meaning was formed because there was a helicopter flying above their heads and they ended up in crisis, but I'll get to that in a moment. Clarity is another way of approaching things. For me, that is the opposite of confusion. That's why it is on the other side of the circle. Some people call this obvious or simple. Again, I don't really like those terms. I prefer the word clarity. It is clear how you need to deal with that situation. At least that's what you think. You take the position that it is clear. For example, customer owes you money and you send an invoice. Obviously, after a couple of weeks, they still haven't paid, so you send a reminder. It's perfectly clear what to do in such situations. For many situations in life, we have these rules of thumb, of these standard practices, standard approaches. It's very obvious what we should be doing. Cause and effect is clear. You have a proper rule and you apply it to the situation. But there is a risk of bureaucracy and complacency. There is a risk of going too far with your rules. So you need to be aware that you're applying clarity, and sometimes you need to shift to another part of this circle. For example, sometimes things are convoluted. Now, in the Cynefin model, this is called complicated. I'm okay with the word complicated. I like the word convoluted even more because, for example, your code is often just by default, it's complicated. It takes some time to analyze and read and to understand how things work because it's a bit intricate matter to deal with. Convoluted would be even a step further. That would be when your code has technical debt in there, or where there are weird things happening. Oh, don't touch that line because it's a very important line of code. Then your code is not only complicated, it's convoluted. It's a step worse, I would say. What do you do in the convoluted domain? You need experts, you need specialists, you need someone just to analyze stuff and work rationally towards a decision. My finances are convoluted, I can tell you. I don't even understand everything, so I need an account manager for that. That is typically the stance that you take with things that are intricate and everything is wired together, and it takes some time to untangle everything. So complicated, convoluted, it's up to you which word to use. I like the word convoluted, but it's just difficult to understand the situation, but ultimately you can understand it. Now, for me, the opposite of convoluted, that's again why it is on the other side of the circle, is coherence. Systems that have coherence have a state that keeps them together. Like a group of people is a team when they have coherence. If there's no coherence, then they are not a team, they're just a group of people. You can call these, of course, the complex systems. Again, I'm okay with you using the word complex. I like the word coherence, but it's fine with me to use other words in this case. The cause and effect are only known in retrospect. I totally agree with the approach in the complex situations. You work with people very often. You need to just interact with everyone to see what is going on. The unknown unknowns, these are often called in this domain or this perspective of sense making. And this is typically the area where you need to run safe to fail experiments, because you don't know what will happen by just analyzing stuff. It's impossible. You need to probe, you need to launch an experiment and then see how the system responds. And then last but not least, crisis. Now, here's where I specifically disagree with the terminology in Cynefin, because in Cynefin this would be called chaos, chaotic, and I do not believe this is chaos. Chaos has a very specific meaning in complexity science and in mathematics. It is deterministic or disorder-based, deterministic randomness. That's not what we're talking about here, randomness. We're talking about a crisis situation. You look at all the examples given in the Cynefin model of chaotic domain, and you read crises situations where someone has to take charge, someone needs to intervene. There's a helicopter flying there, dad or mom has to take charge and get the kids out of the house, and there we go. Or you find out that you've been hacked, for example, as a company. Well, that's a crisis situation. Someone needs to take charge. And as I said, no time to do dot voting or whatever. You need top-down communication, re-establish order as quickly as possible. Basically, doing anything is better than doing nothing. So what we have here is a different picture, a different visualization of sense making. I'm pretty sure other people have yet their own visualizations, and that's cool, because that is what sense making is all about. Different perspectives, different ways of approaching things. I'll give you one other example of how to work with this. Suppose you can't log into your company account anymore. You're confused. What's going on? I have no idea what's going on. Well, turns out that the company has been hacked. Well, that's a crisis situation. Then you need to call in the experts. That would be convolution. What systems have been touched? What needs to be reset, rebooted, reformatted, etc. People need clear instructions. Change your passwords, etc. That's clarity, some rules that people need to follow. And finally, you might need a different culture of more security, more attention to security among the people, among the employees, because someone was not careful enough. That's coherence, that's interaction. So again, which is one example, we've touched upon all the aspects of sense making. Now, last but not least, it is very important that, and that's where Dave Snowden agrees with me, or I agree with him, it is not a categorization framework. It's not like, okay, so the situation is this, therefore I need to approach it like that. No, it is a choice. It is a choice of how you respond to a situation. One of my favorite examples is I was on vacation a number of years ago in a lodge, and one of the other tourists came out of her hut and said, there's a crisis, and oh my God, there was a crisis, and she was panicking. And it turned out that her favorite flavor of tea had run out in the hut. I don't think that was a crisis situation, to be honest, but she caused the crisis basically among the personnel. She chose to see that situation as a crisis and handled and respond accordingly. And then she created a crisis that wasn't actually there in the first place. So you have a responsibility of choosing where you operate, in which part of the circle. And nowadays, my partner and I always say, whenever we run out of something, there's a crisis, there's a crisis. We ran out of cookies. My God, there's a crisis. It has stuck with us. This way of responding. Anyways, crises are sometimes good for you. The benefits of crisis, Nassim Taleb wrote books about that. Sometimes things benefit from shocks, and it is good every now and then to suffer from a crisis. Some people will get better out of the COVID-19 crisis that the world has been plunged in last year. For some of us, it will be not nice to be in, but once you get out of it, it will be better. My friends will have a better house after the crisis, after having it burned down, than before. I'm sure of it. So summarizing again, sense making, we need to build plausible maps of the shifting world. I offer you yet another map. Again, I'm okay if you use Cynefin or any other sense making framework. This is my model now that I like using. It makes more sense to me, tongue-in-cheek, with the visualization and the wording that I have chosen. And if you like it, feel free to go to this URL, bit.ly/shiftup-signup, where I have a ton of PDFs waiting for you, including the sense-making model, but also a tag cloud of all the values and principles of many different methods and frameworks in the Agile community, lean experiment template, values list, innovation vortex, and much more. So hopefully you found some of that interesting. And back to the moderators. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Incredible, and I'm sure Mr. Snowden would be very pleased with that. I know he took part in our virtual community event back in December, and he, they've just done a refresh on a book version, which he's very proud of. But Jurgen, that was an amazing session. I invite you back for some great Q&A in half an hour in the final session. So thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to move on to our next speaker. All the way actually representing the UK. So Mark, are you okay to take the stage? And see you later on, Jurgen. Okay, so here we go. So Mark, hopefully you're there. You're currently on mute, but if you want to just come off mute and, oh no, sorry, it's not Mark, it's Geoff. I'm just, it's never always right on the night is the saying they say. So let's go over to Geoff. Right, Geoff, are you with us?
I am, yes, and
wonderful.
hopefully. So I just need to switch this over, right? Whoop.
Yeah, just switch it over, and I can see your screen. If you want to put on your webcam as well, then at least people can see you. If not, you can hide away, and I will let you start. Perfect. You're looking good. Go for it.
Well, I don't go that far, but thank you. Yeah, so my talk is hopefully not going to be too dark. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It's not about a new model or a framework or anything like that as such. It's a little bit of my experience and a bit of prediction, if you like. So looking back over the last 20 years and saying that in my experience, there is no example of scaling Agile that has ever worked. And again, just from my experience, to be brutally honest, I don't really hold out any hope for scaling Agile in the next 20 years either. But I don't intend it to be as depressing as that might sound. So again, my experience that this as soon as it came out, I can remember talking to my colleagues at BT thinking, well, we've got this working well in a couple of teams here and there, but what about this big beast that is our organization? And that's been the holy grail for every company really since, and so much so that they've been willing to pay extortionate amounts of money to consultants here and there to help them. And it's not that they want the wrong thing, or it's not that anyone's acting disreputably. It's just trying to help those teams achieve something that's very, very difficult. And since then, I've been guilty of this as well. Every conference that you'll go to, you'll see, whether in person or online, you'll see and hear case studies of our journey, our agile transformation. None of them have ever finished. None of them have ever been successful. There's always, we're not quite there yet. And some of those organizations take quite a few steps back shortly afterwards. And I think that's arguably why, you know, things like the scaling frameworks have really taken hold. I've got a bit of a confession to make, and I don't really, I'm not going to say this is something consciously. It's something that sort of rose up through my unconscious over the years. And it's that I think if I really was honest with myself, back at BT, when I was back at the turn of the century, I'm pretty sure at some level I knew it would never scale, but I didn't want to admit that to myself. And I think this is the biggest secret that's been kept by Agile coaches, that Agile actually will scale, that Agile actually does scale. I think we've all known this. Part of us probably wants to believe that eventually someone will work it out and we could pick it up from them. Maybe we're just scared of admitting it to ourselves, because actually if we admit that it can't work at the enterprise level, perhaps we'll be stopped from doing things at any level, and all the things that we're doing at the team level would cease to be. Whatever reason, I think we've hidden away from the reality there, and that's why you've seen things like this. You've seen the horrendous tube maps and the pages and pages of this, that, and the other all coming together to make some nightmare frameworks that sing out and try and appeal to those who are looking for someone to tell them it'll be all right. And the organizations that I've seen go down these routes, they've got good intentions. No one is trying to deliberately sabotage their organization. They just don't have a knowledge or experience of what to do. So they look for someone who says, this is how we can do it. And it's hope. It's hope. And again, I don't even really blame the people who are coming up with these things, because it's all with good intention. But I think we've all got to be a little bit more honest with ourselves and say, if we're going to do this properly, we need to walk the talk. I think we need to use an agile approach to be agile. And what does that mean? Well, I think it means not pinning your colors to a particular mast and selling the hell out of it, or buying the hell out of it. This, I didn't ask Kerry's permission to post this. I feel bad for this actually, but this was a long time ago. A colleague of mine at BT posted this, and this was, like I said, a long time ago, and yet we still had this level of cynicism that it would never work. He posted this as a bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment about the situation at a big enterprise level attempt at becoming more agile. And it's something that, you know, every large organization that I've been to can really relate to. This idea that actually, yeah, we would like to focus on individuals and interactions, but you know, we need processes and tools to control how those individuals, or what we prefer to call resources, interact. And it's kind of saying self-organize like this. And that sort of half-assed attempt is, again, not malicious, it's not malevolent, it's the best efforts that we've had with good intentions, but really struggling to be successful. And one of the things that I think we talked about in the panel discussion, and something that, you know, Jurgen was talking about when sort of making sense of things, is that Agile is a solution to a problem. It absolutely is. And for certain questions, you know, Agile approaches are absolutely the right answers. And I don't think you could really deny that over the last 20 years, there have been more and more of the questions for which Agile is the right answer to, because things have been getting more complex, because things have been getting faster, because feedback cycles need to shrink. But waterfall's not going away, and it shouldn't. Agile will probably never go away either, but equally, it will never be the one way to do things, ever. So it's about, over the last 20 years, getting this tacit acceptance that actually it's not about transforming or transitioning or moving from waterfall to agile. It's about getting that appropriate balance. And I like to use one of the words that Jurgen uses, which is around coherence, but perhaps not in the context that he was using it in his model there. And this idea of the model that we use, the metaphor that we think of when we think of our organizations, it's no longer that mechanical metaphor that dominates anymore. It's still an element of it, but it's a lot more organic now. It's a lot more around resilience rather than robustness, to use some of the other terms that people have already mentioned. And I would say that I've yet to see an organization, and I would be very surprised if I ever do, where they find themselves in an environment where they're just focused on efficiently processing a set number of inputs to try and get a predictable, repeatable product out really, really efficiently. And that's all they do. Equally, I don't think I'm ever going to see an organization that doesn't need to focus a little bit on efficiency at times rather than effectiveness. What's interesting for me is the conversations that I'm having now compared to what I was having 10 years ago is I'm not necessarily coming in and trying to talk to leaders about, have you heard this thing about Agile? It might be useful for you. I don't need to do that. They're asking me about Agile, and in some ways, I'm trying to get them to slow down. I'm trying to get them to calm down and think a little bit more about, well, what is your context? What's useful for you? What's working for you? Where are you right now? What's not working for you in your situation? And once you understand your context, do you have the range of responses, the range of leadership styles, the range of processes that you can flex to make sense and deal with what you're facing, rather than try and put all your eggs into one basket? Am I doing on time? Okay. So a big message for me is that not only are ways of delivering products changing, but I think culture is changing. This idea that historically we've led from the top. Organizations have quite rightly led from the top because the dominant metaphor was one of expertise. Leaders had risen to their position because they knew more. They had greater skill, they had greater experience. And it was quicker and easier to tell people that were less experienced what the right answer is. But if we weren't getting the right results, then we needed to change our actions. Because we wouldn't, so the first sign of madness, or the third sign of madness, is doing the same thing and expecting different results. We would do something different, but when you're operating in an environment, as Jurgen was talking about there, around greater complexity, where the cause and effect is not necessarily easily understandable in advance, it's very difficult to say with confidence that if I change my actions, I'm going to get different results. And we can't afford, even if our leaders still had the greatest level of expertise, we can't afford the time it would take to escalate those decisions up the pyramid and back down again, because someone else would have done something a lot quicker by that time. So we need autonomy. And autonomy is a scary thing, because as Spider-Man didn't say, with great autonomy comes great inconsistency, or potential for inconsistency. From a leadership perspective, I think I mentioned this earlier on, there's a great fear about what am I supposed to do if I'm not meant to know the answer anymore? How do I provide leadership without looking weak? And this redefinition of strong leadership is probably the number one thing that I work with leadership teams on. It's not about knowing the right answers anymore. It's about creating the conditions where people can find the right answers, whether that is through following processes or working things out with expertise and analysis, or whether it's through finding things out through experimentation. That is a scary concept still, even 20 years later. But one thing that I think I found really interesting is we can use motivation, or more accurately, we can use demotivation, motivational debt, not just as something to aim towards so that we can have joy in our work and attract and retain talent, but also we can see that as a signal that something's not quite right, that we're not coherent, that what people are expecting or needing, they're not getting. Because if I were to come to you as a leader and say, go for it, self-organize. But you don't feel you have the skills, the experience, or the safety to do it, you're going to be scared. Motivational debt. Equally, if you do feel you have the ability and the experience and the safety to do something autonomously, but I don't give you the space to do it, you're going to have motivational debt. So tapping into how people are feeling within the organization, it's a great source of indications for the leaders as to what to do next. The one thing that I've really struggled with from a word perspective, so Jurgen was saying how he was preferring certain words to other things. The one word that I've been guilty of using over the years, and I wish people would stop using, is transformation, because it implies that there is an end. There is a state that we're working towards. It's known. I don't believe that. I think the evidence is saying that's not the case. You may think that you want to be this type of organization, but you can't be sure that the circumstances that you're envisaging in 3 months, 6 months, 3 years' time are going to be like that. So instead of transforming, we need to be continually transitioning. And that's a scary concept as well, because humans crave certainty. They crave closure. So as leaders, how can we prepare people for that? We need effectiveness and efficiency. We need planning and responsiveness, something that I think didn't really come through in our appreciation of the manifesto signatories. It's not one or the other, it's both. They said that 20 years ago, it's still relevant now. This is why we shouldn't be trying to scale an agile organization, but continually coherent and resilient one. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Geoff. And I know for those who've been attending some of the other Agile20Reflect Festival events, you will have probably heard Dean who did actually, come up with scaling agile or safe, asking why he wasn't invited to the original signing of the manifesto. Now, the next speaker, inspirational speaker, was invited, and he is going to share his presentation, and we're going to have Geoff come back to answer some of those really hard questions after our final session of the day. So I'm going to hand over now to, well, he doesn't need any introduction, but to Brian, and hopefully, Brian, you'll be able to share your screen, and we can have the final lightning inspirational key speech from the one and only Brian. And I can see your slides now. If you want to throw on your webcam, then your time will start.
In theory, my webcam is on. Let me. How's that?
It's in. So you're all ready to go, and I'll see you in 15 minutes.
Oh, I thought it was 12. That's interesting. Two confessions right now. One is the original topic of the talk didn't work, so this talk is on another topic. The other confession is that I thought this was a 15-minute time slot, and earlier he said it was 12, so I messed that up, and so I've quickly made a few changes, and I'm responding to change, and we'll try to make this done in 12 minutes. My parents are German, so I am not allowed to run long. Okay, something that people used to say back in the old days of Agile, early days of Agile, especially early days of Scrum, was a distinction that was based on a joke, and it's not a particularly good joke, but the joke goes like this. A chicken comes to a pig and says, "Let's start a restaurant and we'll call it Ham and Eggs." And the pig declines, saying that whereas you, the chicken, would be involved, I would be committed. That is, the chicken just provides eggs, the pig has to provide meat, and that's obviously a greater commitment. And the way this was used back in those days was people on the development team were referred to as pigs, and everyone outside the development team was referred to as chickens. Now, this phrase has rightly gone out of style, out of favor, but I want to talk through why that phrase mattered then and how something like it might matter today. So back in the bad old days, say around 1990, it was customary for the chickens, the people outside the team, to tell the team what it was that they were supposed to do in considerable detail, how they were supposed to do it in a fair amount of detail, and when they had to have it done with a precise date. And this was quite a bit of pressure for the teams because it was often impossible to succeed under those circumstances. Now, the reason the business, let's say, was doing this was because software development teams, well, there are two reasons. One is that it was the tradition of those days that a manager's job was to tell other people how to do their job. Geoff alluded to this in his last talk. But a larger reason was they were trying to get some sort of insurance, some way to reduce the risk that the team wouldn't deliver by telling them how and what and when to do things in very great detail. Now, this didn't actually work, and from that, Agile was created. And Agile, as I mentioned earlier, came from several different threads, but one sort of prototypical thread was the type of project that a company started by telling a team, that last project was a complete disaster. You go and try to recover something from this disaster. Just try and give us something. And the result of that was the how basically went away. Do whatever you want, just try and give us something. And the what and the when were greatly diminished in the sense that what evolved was the sort of iterative type of process that we have now, where a team gives you something when they can give it to you, and then you say, that's good, give us something more. Now, in the days of early Agile, we were transitioning from that very command and control style to the modern Agile style, and the chickens and pigs comes in because it was extremely easy for the chickens, the people who had been in the business, whose job had been to direct teams in a lot of detail, easily fell into the habit of directing teams in a lot of detail. And because teams are generally fragile things, they were easily broken by such an effort. And the chicken and pigs metaphor was something that people could use to help with that. I myself, for example, once I was on a consulting gig and I talked to the vice president of development and told him the chickens and pigs story and talked about a lot of things. And then we had a planning meeting, a kind of a heavyweight planning meeting, as was the style then. And this VP of development slipped into the habit of saying things like, but couldn't you do this? Or, but it can't really take that long, and so on and so forth. And I, with a little bit of fear, said, don't forget you're a chicken. And he, being a good guy, said, you're right, I'll be quiet. And he was quiet from then on. So that's the power of a catchy metaphor. Now, things have changed. We're now in 2021. The ideal team is aligned with the company goals. They are involved in understanding the customer and all of the sort of things that you hear about these days. They want to deliver business value, not merely features, not to just be a feature factory, as they call it. And so as a result, everybody is now marching forward together, like these people in the picture, where you have the Red Army soldier smiling, and you've got the peasant in his straw hat and he's smiling, and you've got the machinist with his goggles, and everybody's working together. And so we don't need to have that kind of devices, us versus them rhetoric anymore. However, one thing that I've noticed, actually this has been a kind of true all along, is that a team that's aligned with the business and is going for business value can easily try to do more than they're actually capable of doing well. And they can easily talk themselves into going faster than they actually can. And the result is that they do sloppy work and end up paying for it later. So my idea is that we're all pigs now. We're all kind of fat and happy and working together, but we are in some sense haunted by the ghosts of chickens past who are whispering in our ear, faster, faster, more, more, the way the actual chickens of Scrum in the early days did. So I would like to establish this meme, if you will, of the ghost chicken, so that when people are tempted on a team or outside a team, who cares, to try and do too much, to try and go too fast, to try and make the code worse in order to get something faster, you can say ghost chicken and it will have the same effect as chicken did for me. Okay, another problem with this sort of scheme, and this is where I'm gonna rush through to get done in time, is that people are not great at working consistently toward abstractions like business value or such. People work for other people. We are social animals. We are primates. We work to gain the self-esteem and support of our network of primates, nearby primates. And one of the main ways that we achieve this is through what's called gift economies. Now, if you're in software, and especially if you've been in software around open source, your idea of what a gift economy is probably wrong, because the gift economies that have been talked about in software are in fact from anthropological studies of gift economies that were in the process of collapsing under new societal stresses and were failing and behaving pathologically and badly. So what you learn from them is not something that's useful for creating a sustainable society. I'm not going to go through in time, because of time, for the 3 characteristics of gift economies, but I'll mention them here, I'll show you them here, and you can look at a book, which I'll get to later. The relevance of this is that people who study people have noticed that even though we are in a money economy where we do work for a salary, we just exchange money for work. In fact, things like software development teams or groups in offices or all kinds of groups of people have gift economies hidden inside them. A lot of what's actually going on has some of the same dynamics as gift economies, but those dynamics are hidden and they're generally operate poorly because we have this imagination, we have this idea that we're just independent individuals producing business value in exchange for money, rather than that we are social animals working in a social scene to do all the things that social animals and primates want out of life, which is the esteem of other people and other things. So I mentioned that most things you hear about gift economies are in fact wrong. This book is, and I'm not an expert, but this book is a book on gift economies that I found very helpful toward an anthropological theory of value by David Graeber, who sadly died later last year. So my message here is it's a good idea if people out there learn about gift economies, and I'm done.
That is an amazing timekeeping. I don't know if anyone can, and also the fact that you managed to be agile and edit your slides as you go along is impressive, Brian. I'm truly impressed. And I noticed you putting your Twitter handle on there, and I've just been on your Twitter account and noticed you've got a whole stack of posts on there. So definitely reach out to him. I've added him onto the map, and we're now joined. Thanks so much, Brian. You hopefully you're going to stay on for the big Q&A, which will be in about half an hour or so. It'd be great to have you. So thanks again for your session. It was brilliant. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pass over to Paul. Paul, so you've got a bit of, I guess, a bit of an introduction for a second as Laura kind of takes the stage, and also we just make sure that she can get her slides on and working. Yep. So, you know, fantastic. Hi, Laura's joined, so I'm going to pass over to you.
Okay. So it's my pleasure to carry on with the show. This is part 3 of 3, I guess. Laura will do a pitch, we'll do some questions, and then we'll throw it open to, I think all the panelists are going to come back, plus 2 or 3 others of us. And then we'll just sort of wind up the day then. Let me introduce Laura. And Laura, if you want to try loading your slides up on the screen, and I'll just do the quick intro. I'm Laura's backup should this not work. In this session, we're going to listen to Laura talk about Agile, what, so what, now what, looking good. Laura herself, Laura Empowers, to give her a full name, is COO with the Business Agility Institute and founder of Powered by Teams. This is a consultancy focused on helping leaders and their teams thrive in the midst of change. She's a recovering project manager, and there's a few of us in the same boat, who came to Agile for the sticky notes and Sharpies and stayed for the people. Laura, off you go.
And can you hear me and can you see my slides?
Sounds good. You want to present the slides? I think you've got presenter view there.
I think I am presenting. That's not what's happening?
You might have selected a window rather than the whole screen. So when you shared your screen, so just present. Yeah, I would have thought just press F5 and you should be in business.
So can you see my slides now?
We can. So if you just hit the swap displays, it will then it will take us onto the main page, hopefully. Perfect.
Okay.
You're
perfect. Oh, very cool. Well, I want to thank you, Paul, for the introduction, and I want to shout out to my partners in crime here, Brian, Ray, Jurgen, Geoff, and Mark. What an amazing set of ideas that you have shared here. I think it has done a great job of kind of painting a picture of the breadth of that which is Agile. So I also know that for a lot of people online, I am what stands between you and a beer or a glass of wine. It's that time of the day. So without any further ado, let's get this party started. I have 3 stories to share with you, 2 of profound failure and 1 of fierce optimism. And I hope that those will be of service to you. So, so the what of Agile, so what? And I'm not talking about how do you define Agile, because we could spend the next 6 months talking about that. I'm talking about what led you to where you are right now with respect to Agile. There's a quote that I really, really love, ran across it a few years ago, and it goes something like this. You can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust the dots will somehow connect in the future. And for me, this is a very profound quote, because as I look back on my career now, I've got more than a few gray hairs on my head. It's pretty easy to say, how the heck did I get to where I am now with where I started? I'm the first kid in my family to go to college. I am by education a mechanical engineer. And so the comments that we had about, making the tent bigger and who's in the tent and what came before the tent and, what's happening in the corner of the tent, totally relate to that. Because for me, there's been a lot of sense making in the last couple of years in terms of how did I get here and what's in the future. So my first story starts when I learned a really important lesson very, very early on in my career. I was just out of graduate school, and I learned that $5 million is a lot of money to lose, especially when it's not your money and it's the early 1990s. You see, I was leading a team of people at Hewlett Packard to figure out how to manufacture the first printed circuit boards for the first personal computers. Now, if this is older history than maybe your time on the earth, just know that those first computers were huge, clunky, and they had the computational power of a cat toy, not even your phone. I mean, less than your phone these days. And they had some pretty major problems with reliability. And there were two ways that they failed. They either failed because they would catch on fire. And companies are not a fan of that. The other way they would fail is you turn your computer off on a Friday, you come in on Monday, and it just frankly wasn't going to talk to you. I've had a lot of Mondays myself like that. Thankfully, the problem that we had was of the second time, cold solder joints. And here I am, first kid in my family, go to college, first project, $5 million product recall for Hewlett Packard in the early 1990s was enough that the board knew about it. And so I'm wondering, am I going to get fired? And I'm down in the lab on Deer Creek Road in Palo Alto one night about 7 o'clock. And I'm looking under the microscope at my poor, sorry, cold solder joints that were opened and they weren't soldered correctly, and just trying to figure out what's going on. And over the back behind me, I hear the lab door open, and I hear the echo of men's leather shoes walking across the floor. Now, in Silicon Valley, leather shoes mean it's a boss, and it's a big boss, because everybody else, it's good if we wear shoes at all. And I look over, and here's Dave Packard walking towards me. Now, he and Bill had retired a few years earlier, but they still had offices in this particular building. And the two of them periodically did this management by walking around. So here comes Bill walking towards me. I'm sorry, Dave. 4 meters tall. The man had presence. And I'm thinking, oh, he's just doing his management by walking around stuff. Until he sits down beside me and he says, "Hey, Laura, how you doing?" And I think, crap, they are going to fire me, but at least they're a really classy organization. They send the big dog to do it. And so Dave, I've got Bill now on my mind. Dave sits down and he says, "So I understand we had a little problem." I said, "Yeah." And we talked about the size of it and what was going on. And he said, "Here's my take on it. Hewlett Packard has paid for the lesson, but we didn't get the lesson. I want you to lead the program to go figure out how to put these microprocessors on these printed circuit boards." And then he spent a good 10 minutes talking about the future of the company, what the vision looked like, why this was important. Now, bear in mind, at the time, HP sold calculators and test and measurement equipment. People laughed when somebody said, "Oh, they're going to sell computers." Yeah, right. So he had this vision and he saw how this fit into it. And for the first time in my life, I understood my role and how it connected to what the company wanted to accomplish. So He said, "You've got it. We paid for the lesson. Now go get it." So we thought we've got to do something different. So instead of being the kids in HP labs in the ivory tower in California designing this manufacturing process and picking all of this equipment and putting this together, we need to work with everyone, all 13 manufacturing sites in the company at the time, everybody, all levels. How do we do this? And there was a technician in Spokane, Washington, who said something that changed my perspective. And what he said was, my uncle in Japan has a quote that he likes to say, "The bamboo that bends in the wind is stronger than the oak that breaks." And with that, what we realized was we needed to create an approach to the work that didn't work in the perfect environment with the perfect people, the perfect equipment in very small batch sizes in Palo Alto at 4 p.m. on a Monday. But it had to be resilient in spite of the noise, in spite of the chaos, in spite of the humidity in Singapore and Puerto Rico, in spite of the dry environment in Colorado, in spite of my croissant-loving, break-loving friends in France and Germany and Italy. So as a group, we figured this out, because if we did take your phone apart now, you would see this technology most likely in your phone. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is this group of people with a very clear objective and a very clear vision figured out something and had the absolute effing time of our lives. We became a high-performing team, and to this day, 30 some years later, I am still connected to many of those folks. We check in on each other. We give each other career advice. That high-performing team was, to date, probably one of the most fulfilling parts of my world. And I read a book about that time called The Wisdom of Teams by John Katzenbach. And he talked in that book about, this is the 90s, we're still figuring this out. We just know that, to get a high-performing team, you need to, give them a really good goal. Make it clear. But beyond that, we're not really sure. Most people will find a high-performing team to be a life-changing event that brings them great fulfillment. But because we don't know how this works, you can probably expect one of these in your career. And here I'm going, well, crap. I've already had my great experience and, in my 20s, now what? And that, as I look back on the dots in my world, is the first dot where I see the significant seeds of agility in my life. And so my first question to you as we start to wrap up this event today is, what dots led you here? And like me, you may look back to, dots that are BA, before Agile. That was certainly before Agile. And I am absolutely not suggesting that Dave Packard was an early Agilist in the early 1990s. But he managed in a way, he led in a way, he planted seeds that later became a piece of the story of Agile. So what? The next question, of course, is so what? That's a great question. So as my career progressed, I did all things product development, project management, R&D manager, engineering manager. I have fond memories at Hewlett-Packard of building Gantt charts with my teams on a wall using sticky notes and Sharpies. Each sticky note had a task, and the worked out breakdown structure built these humongous Gantt charts, worked the critical path, figured out how we were going to just barely deliver what we needed to deliver 2 years down the road. And before those sticky notes got shoved into a Microsoft project, the team would have dispersed and somebody would come back and go, hey, we just learned something just happened, we just realized something, and the whole schedule would blow up. And here you are, halfway between Post-it notes and MS projects, something has changed, and you know that the next 2 years you're basically screwed. That was my life. And I remember joking that if I ever found a way to make a living that used lots of sticky notes and lots of Sharpies on a daily basis instead of every 2 years to create a picture of the impossible, I would know that I'd found my nirvana. Well, you know, one thing leads to another in your career, and eventually I get the message that hey, I live in Silicon Valley. Time to stop working at the 900-pound gorilla at the time. Why don't you try the startup thing? So I'm doing various startups, end up at a company that I'm the international release manager. So I'm good friends with Singapore and Germany and France and the UK, and every week we roll all of the code on 12 international sites. And my bonus is tied to the code sticking for 48 hours once it's been rolled out. My arch nemesis is this ops engineer named Becky. And Becky's bonus was tied to uptime and availability of the websites. And so she delighted in calling me at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, yep, this week's rollout's not working. Germany's complaining. UK can't do their thing. Blah, 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 blah. You need to come in and we're going to roll the code back. And this went on and on and on. Until one day, I come into work at a normal hour and there's a meeting for leadership. And we go into a room and we sit down and they say, last night, one of the QA engineers left at 2 o'clock in the morning, having been there since 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning of the previous day, went home, was driving home at 2 o'clock in the morning and wrapped her car around a tree. And she's alive, but we don't know. We believe she'll never be able to walk again. And the company spent 10 minutes talking about this accident and how to support our teams through this. And then spent the rest of the hour talking about the next release, how to keep the pressure on the teams, keep them moving, don't let them get distracted. And I remember going home and telling my husband, I'm done. Tech doesn't work. Software is a sham. Leadership doesn't work. I'm out of here. I'll find another way to make a living. And so I went off and found other things to do. And every so often, I would hear that call of product development and of tech and the joy of creating. And I would think maybe. And then my husband, who had, I'm going to say this and it's going to sound like religion, he had found Agile. And he said, you know what, one of my colleagues, he's got a little consultancy up the road. He's looking for somebody to help him do some marketing and sales for his little Agile consultancy. So, you know, it's a small company. He seems like he's a nice guy. Yeah, you should probably go check this Agile thing out. And if anything, you'll learn something. So I went and checked him out. And it was love at first sight. I realized, hey, there is a way to use stickies and Sharpies on a daily basis. But it was love at first sight because I could see solutions to all of that pain and the problems that I had seen in my career. I saw a CEO with tears in his eyes, a tough old guy from Long Island with tears in his eyes, thank us at the end of an engagement and say, thank you, I've learned to love my team again. I worked with software development teams who told me for the first time ever, they understood the why behind what they were creating, and they actually had the space, the autonomy to figure out how to do it. I saw SVP, a senior vice president, But God bless this man, because he was dyed-in-the-wool, command and control leader. I'm the expert. I just need you to do what I tell you to do. But I told him that he had to come to the training with his team. And he came to the training, and God bless this man, he played the ballpoint game with everyone else and had an aha moment in the midst of telling his team how to do it, that he himself was the impediment to the success of the teams and the success of that company, and frankly, to his own success. And based off of that, went and reorganized his part of his company, set them up for success, and has now risen to the point where he's running his own company. And that was a barrier that he had never been able to break through because of his leadership style. So my question to you is, what is your so what? Because my so what is the people and the teams and the light bulb moments, and dare I say the transformation that can happen. Because for me, that's the so what of Agile. It's the secret, I believe, to high performing teams. And it's one of the most extraordinary things, because it is amazing for our clients. It is awesome for the business. And most importantly, it is deeply fulfilling and enables people to do the best work of their lives. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about only transformation at work. I've seen people whose outlook on life in general changes through the work that we do here in Agile. So that leaves with me with just a few more minutes and the question of now what? You know, the manifesto is 20 years old and the community has a lot to say. Clearly, we've heard a lot of that today. What belongs here? What doesn't belong there? I'm doing it right. You not so much. It's between your ears. It's in your heart. It's something you do. It's something you are. It's over. It's just beginning. So now what? So now what indeed? A few years ago, back before the pandemic, I went to a networking event in San Francisco. You know, and that's, so first off, in front of whoever's left on this call, I promise not to complain about driving to a meetup in San Francisco for at least a year after we're through this pandemic. But I had drugged myself up to San Francisco. I was at this networking event, and I'm making small talk with a software engineer at the meetup. And he's telling me he's probably in his mid-20s, just out of school. This is his first company, and it's a startup, but it's not a small company. And he's telling me about their product and how it's going to change the lives of their customers and how much fun he's having, and just enthusiasm out the wazoo as how lit up he was about what he was doing. And eventually he realizes that we've just been talking about him. And he asked me, what do I do? And I said, well, I work in the field of Agile and agility. And he's, well, tell me about that. What is that? And so I start telling him. And he gets this totally confused look on his face. And he says, I don't understand. That's what we do. We don't call it that, but you've just described how we work. How else would you develop software? I knew what was going to happen, and it happened that day. I finally met someone who doesn't have the history of the pain and the old ways of doing it, the death marches. I actually interviewed at a startup one time where they very proudly showed me where my desk would be and showed me the sleeping bag and the air mattress so that I could actually get a good night's sleep when I slept under my desk after long hours. This guy had none of that. He was brand new to the world, and I totally acknowledge he was one reorganization away from learning what we all know about the past and how there are other ways of developing it, of creating value, and it's not so awesome. So I felt old, but I felt really happy because there is the possibility to create a new world of work through what we're doing here. So as we stand here on the 20th anniversary of the Agile Manifesto, I ask you, now what? What are we going to do in the next 20 years? Because to be frank, the world has never needed it more. We need the hope, the optimism, and the possibility that I believe comes with Agile. The belief that's rooted in the idea that individuals and interactions matter most. That change is something to be welcome. And thank you, Jurgen. Let's cause some change. That customers in collaboration can create magic, and that we can change the world. I believe that the last 20 years have only been the beginning of what we can do together. And please know that wherever you are in this world, we need you, all of you. And I'm honored to have the dots in my career lead me to this place in this community right now. I can't wait to see what we do next together. Thank you.
Laura, thank you so much. I'm not sure what to say. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm really glad you're on the show because, I mean, there's not been much talk of people during the afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you happen to be at the moment. And as a confirmed autist, I'm less sensitive to people than I really ought to have been. It's taken me 30 years to come to terms with the fact that actually people really, really do matter. And honestly, in the last 10 years, I've kind of reached that point. So I'm right with you on what you said. Now, my view, and I'm waiting now, for you guys in the audience, please put your questions onto Slido. And if you're all in tears and can't hold yourself together, I understand. We need you to pitch some questions in the next 10 minutes or maybe a bit longer. It's because Laura finished a little bit early there. But let me start and just get the conversation going, and maybe let's just have a chat, Laura. I mean, my view of the manifesto is it's not a process or a methodology. It's a philosophy. It's a way of thinking and behaving, and it's all about values. You know, these are people things, aren't they? So, I mean, I don't know whether you've answered it or not, but it occurs to me that we've lost sight of the fact that people really count. And do you think there should have been more emphasis on the people and in the industry to engage people in a better way, to get them to recognize that they're going to think differently, that their cultural attitudes and empowerment and collaboration, whatever, these are all things that kind of aren't mentioned in software programming books, you know? I mean, what do you think? Have we let ourselves down in this way, and you're, you know, kind of shouting in the wilderness? It sounds like you're not. You've obviously made progress, but what's your take on that?
No, I don't think I'm shouting in the wilderness. What I have learned is that as the Agile movement has grown over the past 20 years, there are a lot of good business people who have figured out that a framework is much easier to sell than a mindset. And it's as someone who buys, you know, an executive who's looking at wanting to improve their company, adopting a framework has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It comes with a price tag. You can do the happy dance at a certain point in time. Mindset is something that's continually evolving and continually, it's something that you have to own and develop. And so I think we've always been working on this. And I think the difference between the companies who thrive and create amazing futures for the world and those that just merely get by lies in the people and how we work with people and how we help them become what they want and need to be. So I think it's an ongoing thing, but just like I think Geoff said, you know, there is no end point to agility in an organization. It's something that just because you went to the gym yesterday and you did the pull-ups, you still have to come today and do the sit-ups and the pull-ups again. And I think that's just, we're constantly doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, it's a bit like I don't know whether this is a sensible metaphor, but it feels a bit like wanting to lose weight. In that, you go on a diet, you take on a new process, you want to make an instant change, but you can't. It's hard, and then you settle back to the old ways and so on. Is it not the same with process? It's a lifestyle and a cultural change, not a process change.
It is, and here's the interesting thing is the people's mindsets can change in an instant. The story that I told about the SVP and the ball game, he literally was inserting himself in and command and controlling that whole simulation, which was designed to help illustrate how self-organizing teams work. And you could actually so all credit to Chris Sims, because he was the person facilitating. I was observing, and he basically said, hey, to this guy, listen, you've got laryngitis, you need to participate, but part of the simulation right now is you can't talk. And so his team had to continue on and do the simulation with him just as a participant. And you literally could see the point in time where a light bulb went on over this guy's head, and their steam came out of his ears, and he was a changed person. But my guess is years, were spent leading up to that moment, and now he's got a different future because of that. So for one of the things that I would say to the Agilists out there who are training and coaching and consulting, and you have something and you feel like it didn't quite take, you are planting seeds that you have no idea when and how they will sprout and grow, because a lot of seeds have to be planted sometimes before someone has that aha moment, and then they realize, oh, there's a different way of doing this. There's a different way to lead. There's a different way to be in this business. Not to be too much kumbaya, because there is hard business benefits to addressing and taking care of and stewarding the people side of your business.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. I mean, needless to say, you can see the praise that's headed your way on the Slido. But can we get questions? I'm not in control of this, I'm afraid. So can we get rid of all the praise? Yeah, it was a fantastic talk. But there's one of the bottoms. Laura, back in the early 2000s, I was taught that Agile is making decisions just at the right moment when you have the information to make them. Do you agree? What do you think of that?
I think that's part of Agile. It's also part of Lean, right? The whole last responsible moment. So I think that's a piece of it. But the part of the question, though, is also who's making the decision? How is it being framed? There's lots of pieces to the decision-making thing. So, but that's certainly part of it.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think? What's your opinion of Agile maturity models? Are they a good thing or a bad thing? Or what do you? Or what do you think?
I think that anything that serves as a tool to help the continuous improvement and progression of an organization is a good thing. So there are maturity models that are good, and there's probably maturity models that are meant to sell something at the back end of it, maybe not so good.
Mm. I mean, I'm kind of less comfortable with maturity models that focus on process. So if you tick this box by following this process in this way, then you advance some way in maturity. Well, that's not what it's about, is it? I mean, maturity sort of surely explicitly means that you have to gain experience. It's about growing into and learning through mistakes and other things, the lessons. So I'm more critical of maturity models that are anything like based on kind of this process, let's say. But do you not think that we could have almost like an emotional maturity? That's the wrong word, I know, the wrong phrase. But what do you think? Cultural maturity.
Yeah. So we're doing some work with this at the Business Agility Institute, and one of the things that we're grappling with is that when you look at an organization and you want to try to assess this thing, it's not just what is the average intermediate degree or capability of the organization. It's what's the spread, because you can really only be as agile as the least agile part of of the organization. And, you know, to the software developers who are concerned that, you know, now we're talking about more than software. When I did some work with Intuit a few years ago, you know, we were working on what's the cycle time for stories in sprints. And back of that, there was this carefully aged process for how long it took to actually get things into the hands of the customers. So there was at least agile downstream stuff that was hamstringing the organization. So yeah, it's a complicated thing. And the idea of something that really gets to the people side of it is pretty juicy.
I mean, we call ourselves a technology industry, not a people business. But you know what? I think Gerald Weinberg said it decades ago, that all problems are people problems, and we kind of pretend that we can solve everything with technology. You know, technology is tools, sure, but it's also process. Process is a technical solution to a human problem, and we've lost sight of that. I mean, do you think we're making progress on that? We move it. Are we beginning to get into people's heads and say, you know what? Don't reach for a tool when you have a human problem.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at just how things have played out in the pandemic, there have been companies who have thrived and companies who have struggled, and the ones that have the ability to have face-to-face conversations and have the propensity to pick up the phone, you know, start the Zoom session and have the face-to-face conversation, work through problems so much faster. So I think we're getting better. Part of that's driven by the demographics of the newer generations. And there's lots of things driving it. And I think we're realizing that we need to dismantle some of the 19th century management practices. You know, people are not cogs in a machine. And when you acknowledge that and you start to look at, you know, how to reinvent how we work, you know, there's magic that can happen. And, you know, there's so many people here that are part of that.
Yeah. Okay, so a question from, I must apologize for not pronouncing it right, Mihai Daniel Popper. In 20 years, what's the one criticism of Agile that you felt might be right? Or you might say, I might also say, well, look, what would you pick out as the most important thing of Agile? Take your pick on that.
Well, so to me, the most important thing is the individuals and interactions. So I think that's the most important piece of it. What do I think is the thing that might not be right? You know, I'm one of the people who pretty early on was, you know, saying, you know, we're discovering ways of doing everything better. So to me, the natural evolution for this is to acknowledge that we are creating value. Value lies in the eyes of the customer, and that it may or may not be the software. Because even, you know, I always go back to Microsoft Word, and do you remember Clippy? Who cares if there was no user story ever that said, as a Laura, I want a stupid animated something or another to give me silly suggestions about stuff that I'm trying to do in Word at exactly the wrong time. So that wasn't value.
Yeah. Here's another one from Roger. I'm going to skip that one. I'm going to come back to that one. One of the principles is to regularly reflect on how we can become more effective. This is a question from Paul Williams. Thoughts on this? You know, I mean, about this, it seems to me that a lot of methodology, and you know, people who take Agile and turn it into a methodology, they think about improving the process, but they forget to improve the personal improvement, you know, the professional improvement. I mean, what's your take on that? Do you think we've lost sight of that a little bit?
It's an interesting thing, because when I left tech for that period of time that my husband lovingly calls my sabbatical, I got into sales, and I was doing real estate investment portfolio stuff, and I was working at 100% commission. And in that environment, The people who thrive in that are obsessed with personal development and professional development. How can I get rid of beliefs that block my ability to do what I need to do? How do I add new skills? Vertical development, horizontal development, just very focused on that. Because there was a correlation of how much you invested in yourself correlated to the degree of success that you had in what you were doing. When I came back to tech, it's shocking how people don't own and invest in themselves to become better at what they do. And I don't just mean taking the next class to learn the next programming skill or the next management technique. I mean, truly, how do you become a person who has greater capacity to be who you need to be and manage who you are in that situation?
There was a question I was going to ask, but it's been taken away from me.
Oh no!
So your moment on the stage solo is over, Laura. You can be relieved, but please stick around. So can I invite all the other speakers and Uncle Tom Cobley and all to join us in a bit of a conversation, which is partly a free-for-all, but I've got questions to ask, obviously. Thank you so much, Laura, for that.
You're welcome.
I think while people are joining, I mean, the actual question that was actually pitched was an interesting one to me, because it said, essentially, is it okay to cry in front of other professionals? What do you think of that?
I want to hear Brian answer that.
Okay, well, I'm gonna for my 2p worth, I'm gonna pitch my kind of question as a summary. So we'll come back to this one. Brian, don't forget, okay? We've been at Agile sort of kind of appeared, let's say, in a documented form, let's say around 20 years ago, but people were behaving with agility before then. But what interests me is the fact that 20 years on, I don't think we're even halfway towards being agile as an industry, if agile is the right thing to do. And I want to kind of just relate a little bit of ancient history, and it's partly apocryphal, but I've been assured by Tom Gill, who's on the call, that I'm not a million miles off when I tell this story from around the mid 70s to late 70s. So in those days, this is 40, 45, maybe longer, a number more years ago, there were a group of really smart guys on the same corridor in IBM. I can't remember where in the States, and they were all working on, in effect, methodologies. And what they came up with was a range of techniques, a group of techniques which could be used to build systems. And I was reminded, I don't know if you can see this, if I can get it in front of the camera, structured analysis and system specification, Tom DeMarco, circa 1978. And I've bookmarked a couple of things. So one of the philosophies was, we're going to draw models before we start writing code, okay? And you can see they're kind of, I don't know if that's clear, but they are kind of handwritten. And that was one of the informal rules that these guys said, this is the way we should behave in our systems. And those models should fit on a piece of A4 or letter size paper, right? So imagine these are things that are stuck on the wall, hand drawn, shared between people in a corridor or in a locality to build systems. Stuff like data flow diagrams. And if you like, what I just showed you, each of those blobs, okay, looks like a story to me. They would have called it a process in those days, but it looks like a story. And there are connections, that is, there are workflows. Mid-1970s. They also came up with something really remarkable called structured English, okay? I don't know if you can read any of that, don't worry about it. But how different to a cucumber story is that? 45 or more years ago. We had the tools that Agile promote nowadays then, okay? But what happened with the structured methods is, as soon as industry or the IT industry got hold of those methods, they decided, you know what, we can build tools, we can build monstrous methodologies for corporates to take on 1,000-man-year projects with, blah, 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 and the whole thing got commercialized, and everyone lost sight of the fact that this was a lightweight approach to building software. We've been here before, you know, and I wonder how familiar that kind of journey to the Agilists of the past 20 years that would be, because I remember about 10 years ago, lots of messages saying, you know, testing was dead. Remember those ones? But Agile is dead as well, in that it had been commercialized out of all recognition, and we're losing sight of the real principles and the people stuff that Laura's been talking about. And I think Giles or Jonathan has put up the manifesto for half-assed agile software development. You can see the abuse that it's taken. Now, so my question to the group is, could we have made more progress than we have? You know, I'm acting as devil's advocate, but in 45 years, I don't think the tools we use are much better. What do we think? What does the team think?
I can start.
Yeah, please.
So the Agile Manifesto did us a world of good. It shook up the world. It really did. At the time, it was highly controversial and meant to be so, hence the word manifesto. So we all think it's a wonderful thing. And that's kind of our, if I could use the word, kind of our God. And then from that, we spawned all these religions. we have, you know, we all sort of agree with this basic thing, but then we all have our own biases, our own knowledge and skills, and we've carved off individual, we've written a few books, created a certification program, and PMI has one too. And then that's created massive confusion and it's gotten to a point where if I'm a consultant, I have to get 12 different certifications to cover everything, to cover all the different sources of knowledge. So I think that lack of centralized body, if you will, sponsoring Agile has actually kind of hurt us. Like if you look at PMI, like it or not, it is kind of a controller of the body of knowledge and spreads it. So at least there's some common thought. And you can say that's a bad or a good thing.
Thank you.
So if you think of the different renaissance that have occurred with the way we work or the way that we approach work, and for people who've been in the industry for a long period of time, you know, we've went in waves. And so, you know, I lived through those hardware days that Laura was bringing up, where I literally slept underneath my lab bench. And, you know, first silicon and first release of, you know, the 386 and the 286 and all those processors was a dedicated bunch of people who slept underneath their desks. And I remember that notion of putting your hand on your car and it was still warm in the morning when you finally did go back to the office, if you did get a chance to go home. But work culture has changed and connectiveness has changed. You know, not too many people are buying fax machines anymore, or you know, I think the overall business of pagers has pretty much gone away. And I think we're closer now together than we ever have been. And I think that produces a set of, I think, awkwardness and a set of complexity that then overlaps across of these methods that, you know, if I go think of every time I read about Tom Gilb and his work, you know, some of those things that were being brought up and talked about at the time, there was not enough oxygen in the room to be able to go off and talk about those things. And today, as we grab onto those ideas and pull them to a time to go solve a problem, I just think that sometimes we're more open to go doing things, and other times the crisis has us go and have to go search those things out. COVID is a great example. Everyone didn't expect that I would be reading right now that Salesforce, Microsoft, Intel, my old former stopping grounds, and others have all just got rid of, you have to come to the office to work, and they're looking at permanent work from home strategies. Who knew that was going to happen? You know?
Am I being pessimistic about saying that we haven't made progress? Or I'm sorry for ranting, by the way, but it seemed like a good idea for the topic. Brian, please.
So Jerry Weinberg used to say that he had done test-driven design on the Project Mercury in the 50s. And with all due respect to a giant in the field, he's wrong. These, similar to a person that I knew who said they had done object-oriented programming in assembly language in the 60s. He's wrong too. These things aren't, all of these things are a network of related things. Don't know quite how to express this well, but in fact, since I don't know how to express this well, I'll be quiet until I can think of the right way to express it well.
Let me tell a very quick story about when C++ came out. And at the time, I was working on a testing standard. Can you believe? I wouldn't do that again. But and the guys who came from a company that built a code software analysis, a code analysis tool, and particularly C++, said that in all their clients that they found, all the developers were using C++ to write C. They weren't doing object-oriented analysis or design or programming or anything like that. They were simply using a C++ compiler to write C because they wanted it on their CV, of course. And did we not do the same thing? Is not a risk, or is there not a history of us as an industry taking on things like Agile, dare I say, and paying lip service to the real discipline and philosophy of it? I mean, I guess that's my gripe, in that I feel that as an industry, we fail in this way.
Well, I thought of what I couldn't think of later. I'm not sure this is quite addressing you, but there's this idea in user interface design that actually comes from psychology of affordances. The typical example being that we've all experienced is these doors that have a thing that says, wakes you want to push on it, and you push on it and you realize you have to open it. There are certain kinds of door fastenings that afford pulling and some that afford pushing. And the things like TDD that I talked about and C++ that you're talking about are because, in large part, because the affordances are wrong. If you work in, say, Smalltalk, it wants you to do things in an object-oriented way. And so you naturally slide into doing things in an object-oriented way. C++ does not. C++ is like pushing on a door when you should be pulling on it. And that's one of the reasons why Agile happened at the time it was. It was at a time when both the business world, especially the business world around software, and the technology afforded the development of this style of working. So until you have the surrounding environment, the idea just is not going to stick.
That's really interesting to hear that, Brian. I just want to also try to transition us to the wider Q&A. So thank you, everyone, all the attendees and participants who have listed so many amazing questions. There were so many, actually. We're unable to put Slido back up because they're just such a huge volume of questions. So what we've done is take the questions and kind of theme them into clusters. And what we're going to do now with this last Q&A session for the conference is do a bit of round robin style. So speakers, I'll be asking you a specific question, but please, if any other speaker would like to jump in and also help answer the question, please, you're more than welcome. But we'll do a bit of round robin style and then open up to some wider questions for everyone. So to kick off, Mark, you're up first. And the question for you is, was the commercialization of Agile a good thing?
I guess and no. I am disappointed with the way it's become fragmented. I'm disappointed with the infighting. I'm disappointed with the lack of discipline. That is, to be honest with you, I think it has done a disservice to our business community and to PMOs, because if I'm a certified ex-master and I'm a PMO and I don't know Agile, it sounds like you know your stuff, so here's a couple of $1 million for a mission critical project. And by the way, the Agile people say, don't, you know, we're different, just let us do our own thing. They're not disciplined, they're not educated, stuff goes bad and Agile gets blamed. It's not Agile's fault. Agile's amazing. Some people take a less rigorous approach to it than others. To add to the previous question, are we in a better place? Absolutely, we are, because teams I've worked with are happier teams. They have more joy, they produce better quality, they bond as a team. We never had that before. I'm old enough to remember when we worked in cubicles. And Scrum, by the way, some people believe Scrum was a mechanism to get people out of their cubicles to actually talk to each other once a day and provide some status. So there's some history behind Scrum that's kind of interesting. And do we really need that now? Do we need to coax people out of cubicles? It's a different world, but that's another story.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. I think a lot of us can empathize with everything you just said. Giles, you're up next.
Okay.
Do you think Agile has been successful? If it is a journey, how far along are we?
Oh my God. Groundhog year. I genuinely, I don't know. I'm going to actually borrow, if Mark is cascading his answers from the previous answers, I'm going to do the same from Mark's, because I actually think it's a bit of a yes or no, obviously. It's a very subjective question, isn't it? Has it been successful? I mean, we wouldn't be here if in many ways it hasn't been. In one form or another, mindset, philosophy, values, whatever that actually is, ultimately, yes, right? And why there's still this propensity for new people being here today, joining in the conversation, wanting to learn new, and obviously listening to the amazing thought leaders who have joined us here today. At the same time, to Mark's point, we've missed some key moments in this journey. We've missed some key things that we could have done differently. And I genuinely think, from my perspective, with some of the organizations I've worked with, you know, I think I wish we had done more with the senior management in organizations earlier on in process than where we are today. For me, they seem to have been left out of the conversation on so many occasions for one reason or another, whether on purpose, whether it was just through the natural world of it's only for technology teams, this new crazy thing called Agile, and therefore the rest of the organization doesn't need to hear about it in any way, shape or form. And for me, I think if we'd had that conversation 10, 15 years ago with some of these senior managers, actually brought them on the change journey with us, I think today we could be in a completely different position than where we actually are. Now, my hope and aspiration beyond this, and obviously why we're here, why we're wanting to host this event, and why we put this together as a little community, is that, you know, in possibly 5, 10 years, things are different, and perhaps we do play catch up. You know, there's the meme, you know, going around, who started your digital transformation in 2020? Was it the CEO? Was it the CFO? Was it COVID? I mean, it was one C, but we don't know which one. So, you know, the point being is we need to obviously still do a lot more to change organizations, organizational design, system thinking, system design, design thinking, whatever you want to call it. So yes, to a large part, it's been successful in one form or another. No, it hasn't been in another form or another. There's still a long journey to go. But let's celebrate the successes of everything we have done. Let's not keep beating ourselves up for some unknown reason, flogging ourselves, you know, and sort of saying, you know, we've done a really bad job on this over the last 20 years. We haven't, right? We have made huge strides. We've made huge progress in organizations. And some of the new ways of working we have are phenomenal. We've just got to keep going. So that's my answer.
Thanks, Giles. Brian, you're up next. This is a little bit familiar from the question that came up in the panel discussion, but it's such a goodie that we clustered a couple questions together. So I'm going to ask you directly. If you had a chance to either add a new principle or remove one from the manifesto today, what would it be?
a principle as opposed to a value.
Oh, yeah, expand that out, sure.
Well, I still don't remember any more of the ones that I said I would add when I spoke earlier. I'm sorry, I have no thoughts in my brain.
Okay,
Mark's got his hand up.
Mark?
I could offer one. We've got several, but one might be visualize the work, and I forget the last part of it. But that visualize. Oh, limit work in progress.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Good. Any other speakers want to opine?
Well, I think one of the principles must be to take those principles and apply them. In that, what's not, to me, not necessarily very clear is that we're a technology industry, but actually, you know what? We're not really. We're a fashion industry. Every time the next shiny thing comes along, we all run towards it and all think, and then all that stuff that we've been learning for 5 years to throw away, relearn, make all the same mistakes again and again. But this is a kind of a grumpy old man's kind of position. But what I didn't get from the Agile Manifesto was this is a cultural human change, not a technological solution to the problems of the past. And it's all about people, and that's why Laura's talk was so important. And yeah, so there was nothing about people other than the people and interactions thing. I think that's probably the area that it was a bit lacking. If Laura wants to come into that, that's my view. No,
Right,
Laura?
Well, I could say, I guess, reaching backwards, it's okay to cry to work, but it's kind of a bad sign if it happens a lot.
So I thought about this, and here's my take on it. I had tears in my eyes because I'm deeply connected to what I do here, and it connects to my life purpose. And I am fine with that making a few people uncomfortable, because I am here to change the world. And it's a reflection more on people who ask a question like that than it is on me.
I mean,
Okay.
just to add to that, Laura. So, I mean, your story was really, I think, hit home on a few things. And I remember having an Agile team, and we actually had a very similar circumstance where one of our developers was in a car accident with his family, and one of the lead developers, which his absence. Fortunately, he was fine. His wife, unfortunately, had to go through multiple surgeries. But I remember this was right before a demo meeting, and we were at a sprint review, and our customers immediately said, "How can we help?" Not just the team pulling together, but now we've got the customers who are saying, "You know what? This stuff that we're delivering, we understand that it's important, but I remember the one customer, that's why we do an MVP, is because we know that if it doesn't happen, we can slow down. It's okay. Can we send some engineers to also come in and help?" And it was just this great outreach of being open and human, because it's funny because I've been seeing a lot, not that I'm old, but I have been seeing sort of this trend going on in the tech industry where they look at the color of your hair, or in my case, the lack of hair. And there has been some, cashing out of the more senior people within the organizations. And my view is that us as us being able to be humans coming together to go build something. I think if you look at the manifesto, it tried to go off and bring in the human elements together, but I think it just needs to be clarified a little bit. And even some of the earlier drafts, by the way, were much more clear on here's the stuff that customers should care about. And this is a document Alistair shared one time. This is the stuff that, the manager should care about, stuff that applied to the management types. And these are the things that the team should care about. And those got stripped away at the final release. And it would have been good to have kept that, because I think it would give some people some focus in saying that this is actually talking to me, the manager, or this is talking to me, the customer, me, it's the teammate.
And Ray, this actually segues really nicely into the question that's next for you, which is, yes, I know. Is there any undiscovered area left for exploring with Agile? I think you might have already started to answer that a bit, actually.
I think the answer is yes. I mean, I think if you look at the complexity of delivering anything, there's always a new dimension to the problem. And having, and I've seen a lot of colleagues who've not had to work worldwide before, now having to go work worldwide to get stuff delivered, or work in this manner, where we're all behind this, the camera. I think that as we're discovering things like, case in point, I see, Jurgen going through and taking, say, Snowden's ideas and evolving them to where it fits his mental model better, or taking other concepts that we learned before and then bringing those up to where we now have a new method that's coming out. I think we just need a bigger stage that we can talk about those methods more, because I think what happens is it gets put away, or it doesn't get main stage. When we're talking. The last component of it is just, and this is one thing that I hope our community could do better. Cite your sources, cite what you learned from, cite who you got it from. Reach out to others and saying, look, I learned from this individual. Give them credit. Too many times we just see something, I look at it and go, that looks a lot like so-and-so's work. And questioning them, where did they get it, and then find out that they thought it was public domain, when reality is it's somebody's IP. Please go through there. So I don't know if I fully answered the question. The things to explore, I think, is the further left of the life cycle, which is in the opportunity phase, when we're framing new opportunities. Some of the business agility stuff starting to frame that really well and nicely, and then there's this other opposite end of the front I don't think we've talked about at all, which is how do we make something go obsolete and do it in a way that's humane, because something's, like Clippy. I mean, we all like Clippy, Laura. I don't know what you're getting over Clippy about, but Clippy had a really terrible retirement, I think. Versus it was part of the pulp culture that we created in tech. And I think we have to have a better, more graceful way of putting things out to pasture.
Great, thanks Ray. Laura, you're up next. Sometimes some people say we might be overhyping Agile and therefore sometimes delivering disappointment. We've got a great theoretical idea, sometimes don't expect to reach it. What are your thoughts on that?
So Agile is a journey, not a destination. So somebody who's saying, are we there yet, has missed the point of the last 20 years, in my opinion. So you start where you are, you figure out what your North Star is, and you move towards it. And overhyping, I think it's ironic that we talk about overhyping, and then at the same time, I think one of the universal challenges for most organizations is we don't communicate nearly enough. So more honest communication and linking vision to what we're doing today, and less hyping would be good. But it's all a journey, and anybody who says, we didn't get there yet, so this stuff must not work, has missed the point.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Jonathan, you're up next. How can we influence management who aren't following Agile principles or prefer a more command and control style? Or you can expand that question out to just management not necessarily following the Agile principles.
Sure. I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer this, so I may divert the question slightly.
Yeah.
But that's absolutely fine. You know, partly one of the things I definitely wanted to kind of bring in, and I'd love to hear everyone's opinion here, is around applying methodologies that are designed for manufacturing into software development. And I think, you know, throughout today's session, we've talked about the human aspect, which has been raised over and over again. And, you know, but we still apply Lean, Six Sigma processes because we feel comfortable with the success maybe Toyota's had with the manufacturing, but people aren't a repeatable process. There's so many more moving components, and I love what Ray had to say, and obviously Tom Gilb's here today, and I tried to kind of, I know Paul did pick up a book. This got published back in 1973, and the slides which I put on quickly around my TED talk, I talked about Hewlett and Packard doing what I thought was iterative, in the same way that Tom wrote Evo. You know, part of it is these processes of build and test, you know, and you can see the picture of back in Silicon Valley where I'm stood next to the garage where Hewlett and Packard was doing those first calculators. You know, there's so much that we've come a long way with, like language and all this other kind of stuff, which Paul was showing in the book that he picked out from the 70s, that actually some of these engineering practices and how we go about developing software, maybe we need to own Agile a little bit more, and that maybe, you know, not applying other disciplines is the right way of doing it. And I'd love to hear what people have to say about that. And so yeah, that was kind of my answer to a completely different question.
Thanks, Jonathan. Jurgen, this is actually right up your alley, maybe. Did you want to opine on this one? Influencing management?
Sorry, I was muted. You'd have to rephrase the question for me because I lost throughout Jonathan's reply. I lost what the question was actually.
Sure, it's how can we influence management who aren't following Agile principles?
Well, what's their problem? What is the problem of the managers? You need to empathize with them. You don't ask managers, can you please be agile? No, you go to them, you empathize with them, and you try to understand what their problems are, and then work from there. Like one of the most famous books ever written is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the habits, as I remember, is seek to understand before trying to be understood. And that means that whenever we want to get something done by someone, we want to change their behaviors, we first need to understand them and figure out what is on their minds. So the example that I often give was when I was CIO, I want to get something done by my CEO at the time, because I had all these developers breathing down my neck, but we don't have sustainable pace, and we were working overtime far too much, etc., etc. I didn't go to the CEO and said, well, we need this, we need that. I understood his problem, which was that he got phone calls late at night from our customers that the websites were down. That was his problem. He didn't like that. And I said, okay, I'm going to work on that for you so that you don't get those phone calls anymore. It was quite coincidentally tied to the problems that developers had about sustainable pace and everything. But I phrased it from his standpoint, from his perspective. I tried to empathize with his needs, and I did not use the word agile or scrum or whatever. Who cares? I was solving somebody's problem, and the CEO is just as much a human being as the developers. And yes, even the CEO is allowed to be happy, just like everyone else in the company. And yeah, in that case, I was able to turn things around, and one of my few achievements in life is that I was able to get to turnaround drop to practically zero in just 2 or 3 years time. It was like 10, 15, maybe almost 20% at times, because things were not working well. But after introducing agile practices, there was happiness apparently, because people didn't leave their jobs anymore. It was far too much fun while we were working compared to any other offers that they were getting. So I think that was quite an achievement with Agile.
Good, thanks, Jurgen. Mark, you're up again. Should organizations be 100% agile?
No. I mean, I think that it should be the default. I think that we should try to be as agile as possible. But as I said, I give you an example, an IT example. Maybe I want to bolt in a product that we buy, do an integration, it works with everything else, a CRM or whatever, and then send them away. That's a project. You staff teams, you get vendors, shortlist, blah, 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 bring them in, they build something, warranty period, that you release them. I'm sorry, that's a project. That's not a product. But anyway, that doesn't really answer your question, because you can still use an agile approach with that. But clearly there's a different example within a company. I'm rolling out infrastructure, a Windows upgrade across the company. That can be done in a serial fashion with a work breakdown structure. I'm sorry, it can be. So not everything has to be agile. And it's not black and white, by the way. It's a lot of PMOs are bimodal. If you pass this checklist, you can do agile. Otherwise, you're stuck with the big methodology. Too bad for you, because you've got a team of 15 people, and our checklist says the team has to be 9 or less, because that's what Scrum says. So how ridiculous is that, right? It's not black and white, it's gray. And in fact, in the toolkit, the DA toolkit, it's not 100% agile strategies. There are some things in there, like a requirements document, that might not be classic agile. But you know what? In some situations, you're going to need to do it. If you're tendering something out to a vendor, you can't just give them a few sentences and user stories and tell them to come back with a quote. No, you're going to have to actually get forced into a little bit more upfront to hand it off so they can actually bid on it. And you can either throw up your hands and say, we're not doing agile, or we can say this one little bit, we'll step back and do something a little bit less agile. And then once we get into the project, full speed ahead with agile. So it's a hybrid, and it comes up to this, right? Thinking. Yeah, like I love what Tom says about this stuff ain't new. It's been around for decades. And people are reinventing it and thinking this is brand new. It's not. I'm a methods nerd. That's my background. A method is roles, activities, and artifacts, and rearranging them and calling them a method is what we've been doing for decades. RUP, Rational Unified Process, that I used to teach, used to be a thing. It's got some good stuff in it. It's got some bad stuff in it. Nobody even talks about it anymore. We've repackaged it and come up with new stuff. So the answer is yes. You just need to be flexible, pragmatic.
Good, thank you. Okay, next I'm going to open up to a panel. Oh, sorry, Paul, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if anyone wants to speak, just wave your arm and keep an eye out. I think there's a notion from most technologists, and let's call ourselves technologists for the time being, put themselves at the center of the universe, and that makes us less capable of listening well to our customers, of delivering value, and doing all the good stuff that we talk about, because we think everybody in the planet should be agile because we're agile, even if we're actually not so agile. And the thing is, some businesses are not agile in that sense. Banks are never, ever, ever going to be agile. It's just not the way they do business. And government, some aspects might be agile, but others, absolutely no way. Forget it. So that does not mean that individuals in those businesses cannot have an agile philosophy and be quick off the mark and respond very quickly. By the same token, people who are agile can still work in waterfall projects. You're just a bit quick off the mark. But this is all down to the individuals themselves. I mean, there are smart people who worked in waterfall who make things work, who get things done. And there were people who did not. By the same token, there are people who work in an agile environment who aren't so capable. Agile is not fairy dust that makes people suddenly more productive. So I think we should step back from thinking agile is, and agile is the center of the universe, and we should, by some kind of, morphing, or I don't know what the word is. I'll think of it in a minute. But we shouldn't assume that we know best, and it's a very arrogant position. So anyway, that's what I would say.
Well, just to add to what you're saying, I think You know, it's funny because we keep talking about it as a thing versus something that institutionalized, that becomes the dominant narrative within the organization. And I've seen plenty of adoptions, you know, where, you know, they treat it as a destination and all of that, but resilience, building organizational resilience to saying, we are a flexible organization and being able to go off and address the needed complexities of delivering X. Agile is about that. And I think what I hear in most companies, that when they're starting off, in particular, the Agile way of approaching things is a fit for purpose, yes, but it's also, there's a lot of vulnerability that exists in most organizations in the very beginning. And what it goes is, it simply is that most of the upper management, and to the, when Jurgen was talking about his stuff about the culture of management, is that Agile is what they do. You know, those people over there. It's not what I do. It's not how I act or behave, or it's not the company culture. And so the vulnerability that's built into the system at that particular point is where most people go to that death spiral. And I've seen companies where, to the point where Agilists rename themselves because they're vulnerable, because they're gonna, suddenly someone's gonna come after them because they have Scrum Master by their name, you know, versus the opposite of that, which is, it's essential to our business. It's how we work. And that, to me, is a dominant cultural phenomenon that occurs when the management of the organization, the leadership, and I don't mean leader in the term of a leader who is at a CEO or other position. I mean all leaders within the organization, all the way up and down, go, this is essential and this is how we get things done.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, I've got one last, oh, sorry, Jurgen, were you gonna?
Well, one silly example just came up, if you allow me 1 minute to share. So we have elections coming up in the Netherlands in a couple of weeks. And because of COVID, they've decided that people from 70 years and above are allowed to vote by mail. Now, I know in the US this has been a bit of an issue. But in our country, this is going to be tried for the first time. And I am surprised that they actually tested how that works, and it turned out that half of the elderly people are unable to fill out those forms correctly. So half of the voting forms have to be rejected. I thought it was amazing that they tested it. The only problem is everything is already printed. Everything is already done, basically. They cannot just print all the forms again. And I'm, with my Agile mindset, I think, oh my God, I mean, it's so simple. Just test this as quickly as you can, a couple of times, until you have those ratios down to only a small percentage doesn't get the forms. So Agile has a long way to go, and nobody uses the word Agile in this context, but that's what it is. Right? It is having a shorter feedback cycles, testing before you go full steam ahead with printing all those forms. So the solution is now better explanations of the complicated forms for 1 million people. And oh my God, it's so simple. So yeah, we have a long way to go with Agile. I don't care if we call it Agile or anything else, but yeah, that's just what occurred to me during this conversation.
Thanks, Jurgen. Actually, Paul, can I move on to the last question? Okay, so, huh? No worries. Okay, great. Oh, I've got a question that I'm just going to open up to the panel, but I'll start off with Giles, if you could please kick this one off, and then anyone can jump in. So all of us who are attending this, participating, speaking at this event, I think it's safe to say that whether we're on, you know, the first days of our Agile journey, or we've been doing this for 20+ years, we're all here because we love Agile, or we're curious about it, we're passionate about it. It's our calling for some of us. I've heard that phrase tonight. And you know, we're keen, we're Agile enthusiasts on this call. But my question to you all is, starting with Giles, is, has Agile actually created any damage?
Oh, yeah, yes. I love the fact that as soon as I said that, there's just everybody nodding heads, which is great. Yes, absolutely. I think to some of the points that not only were raised in the panel discussion, but actually were raised through some of the TED Talks earlier today as well. I just think because some of the things we've done, you know, a lot of organizations, you know, certainly have ended up in a situation where the organization has been sort of crushed into or a particular way of working or a particular framework without it being allowed to grow, evolve naturally, organically as well. We've ended up in this situation where, you know, it has created organizational damage, shall we say. And instead, what we should have done is actually sort of sat there, gone back to basics a long time ago, just like the same comment I made earlier with the management piece. We should have sort of sat there, taken the organization as this entity, and actually found something that actually worked for it, rather than somehow being so prescriptive. Now, I again think that, you know, a lot of us, especially in the coaching world, need to be thinking that we should be trying to find, in many ways, to find ourselves redundant in the organization. You know, we go in, we provide help, we provide this coaching, this you know, mindset approach, we provide the appropriate tools and processes and raise the awareness of them for the organization to work out what's right for them, instead of kind of armies of consultants coming in and actually kind of going, you do this, you do that, you do that, you do that, boom, and then the organization fails. You just have to go back to all the state of Agile surveys. Now, the 15th is now being run at the moment, and I know there's members of the panel here today who've, you know, been actively sort of pushing and asking people to make sure they're filling this in, which is phenomenal. And yet you see also the McKinsey and the Deloitte surveys as well, which are sharing the things where, you know, the percentages of organizations that not only just move beyond short-term transition, but move to that long-term sustained transformation. Now, I know Geoff didn't want us to use the word transformation, so let's use the word evolution, change, growth, whatever it is that we want to use instead. But it has done damage. But again, right, with everything, as I said, let's not beat ourselves up, especially for those people wanting to learn about it. It's done an inordinate amount of awesomeness and good for organizations as well.
Thanks, Jess. There's time for one or two more, if anyone wants to go.
I'll just keep it short. True story. One time I was asked to go into an organization, a fairly large organization. They had tried an Agile, and I will use the word transformation, twice, with one of the largest consultancy groups in the world, and failed miserably twice. And they asked us to come in and said, Mark, help us choose our ways of working. This ain't working, we gotta do something different, but I only have one thing, you can't call it Agile. So I'm like, what? So true story.
A fool with a tool is still a fool. I don't think Agile does any damage, people do damage.
True. Actually, I think I remember. I mean, again, this is a kind of an old man's kind of perspective, you could say. But I remember reading the Tom Peters books, you know, In Pursuit of Excellence and those things in the mid-80s, and being very impressed by some of the stories. One that just came to mind when Jurgen was telling his story about voting and stuff was, I think it was it Lee Iacocca, who used to be the head of General Motors back in the 60s, and it's an apocryphal story. It's like most stories. And he was like a new chairman of the board, and there was a suggestion that they should take their best-selling car, take the roof off, and make it a convertible, and see whether that would sell. And the designer said, well, it'll take us 6 months to figure out how to do that, and the marketing guys would say, well, our marketing plan will take 3 to 6 months. And the production director sort of said, oh, it'll take 9 months to tool up and this, that, and the other. And Iacocca slammed his fist on the table and said, no. Take one of our cars, cut the roof off, tidy up the bare metal, drive it around town and see if it turns heads. Do it this afternoon. That's what's possible in a corporate. That's what's possible in every organization. So Agile isn't a process or a method, whatever. It's an attitude. And there are Agile people that, you know, I mean, how the hell did we build the bloody pyramids except with agility? You know, tell me, you know. So Agile with a small a is not new. It's a human trait that's been suppressed by the processes that we've applied in the past. And we're beginning to open the doors to allow people to express their creativity and just, you know, productivity as well. So let's not pretend that it's new. That's kind of my take on that.
Yeah,
Great, thanks, Paul. Great. So just
Brian's got his hand up a second. Just one second. Brian's got his hand up.
Thanks. 2 points. One is it certainly has hurt people because the character traits that were once fine in a team, some of those character traits are no longer so fine because of an emphasis, say, on communication. The second thing is there were two purposes to the Agile Manifesto meeting. One was to figure out what these different methods or people had in common. And the second was to find a better name than the name that was used to describe them then, which was lightweight methods, which is not best from a marketing point of view. And the term Agile was a great success from a marketing point of view, to the point where it's become a synonym for good. And I actually kind of think that was a problem, because now everybody wants what they do to be called Agile, because if you're not Agile, what are you? You're torpid or inflexible. And so quite a long time ago, I found myself wishing that we hadn't named it Agile, because it's too attractive. And I proposed the alternative name, artisanal retrofuturism crossed with team scale anarcho-syndicalism, because nobody will hear that and think, oh, why, that is exactly me. It might be better if we talked about our specific thing rather than make our specific thing all under the umbrella of Agile.
Brian, thank you. Thank you for that. I feel like I do identify with that name, to be fair. But speakers, thank you so much for your time. Laura, Brian, Ray, Geoff, Jurgen, Mark, and then our organizer. Oh, I love the dance party too. And our organizers, Paul, Jonathan, Giles, thank you so much for the last 3.5 hours, starting with our Futurespective panel, through to the TED Talks, and through to Laura, your incredibly moving presentation and talk. Thank you so much. And Giles, do you just want to take us home for the rest of the night? Well, take a, you know.
Look, I gotta say,
Giles.
Yeah, exactly. Party around here. Anybody wants to come? Unfortunately, international travel is restricted, but look, I've got to give my major appreciation to everybody. Okay, thank you very much, as always, for coming on and doing these. You know, I've got to give, obviously, my thanks to Laura. You know, your talk just, you know, had me in bits as well. So, you know, the empathy that you showed and the emotion that you gave was just exemplary. So, you know, heartfelt thanks to you for that. You know, and again to everybody else, Mark, Jurgen, Brian, Ray, Geoff, all of the things you've shared to this community here today. I mean, at one point, you know, with the registration numbers, you know, 1,302 people on GoToWebinar. I mean, these are just insane numbers. So, you know, you've got to be absolutely, you know, very proud of the impact you're having on this community. Not only those who have been around the block like myself, but for those people who are only just starting that journey as well. I hope that all of you will certainly take part in our book that we want to put on beyond this, and add your own sort of sentient thoughts, and give those to us to share to the wider community as well as we go forward. But you know, from us, from JPEG Worldwide, from the Agility Leadership Network, I just personally want to say thank you very much to everybody, to my fellow colleagues, Ashley, Jonathan, Paul, for being absolutely rock stars as ever when we do these events. And I genuinely look forward to seeing you all at an event very, very soon.
Or 20 years away.
Thank you, Giles. Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you, Giles. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Well,
you.
guys,
Yes, guys, see you all very soon.
Bye.
Take care. Be safe. Oh, that was quick. I think we've still got 100 or decreasing quickly in the audience. So
yeah, I think we may need to just close her down. So I have tried to end webinar for all. I don't think I have the power anymore, so we'll have to organically let it roll down. So if we all leave, then it should end. So you're allowed to use the end webinar for all. On that bombshell.
are we talking
Yes, guys.
again tonight or just closing down?
Closing down, yeah.
And then
Okay.
come back in.
Oh no.
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 That's it.
Well done. Andy.
Right,
Well done, everyone.
Okay,
Good
thanks,
night.
guys.
Bye, Ash.
Bye.
It's interesting. I can't. Oh, there we go.